So, my friends, we are here once again with Scott Weatherly, the 20th Century Geek, and also of Stories of Time and Space. He's also an author. And, well, Scott, you've been up to a lot recently, so going through all that will take a long period of time. But Moon Knight. Moon Knight is a connector. Like, I associate Moon Knight with you now, and anytime I see anything Moon Knight, I think Scott. Because we had that conversation, it was episode 123 of Genuine Chit-Chat. It was actually 3 years ago. It was in April 2021, which was before the Disney Plus series. I came on one of the episodes of the Disney Plus episodes that you did as well on Comics in Motion, which was great, Midnight Mission. And so we spoke a little bit then, but that was the introduction. That's when I hadn't read any Moon Knight or anything like that. I wanted you to introduce me to the world. And now I have read a pretty hefty chunk because of recommendations from yourself and Mr. Tony Farina, all because you, good sir, have released, to my knowledge, it's your second book of essays, which you've edited. Yeah. So I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about any anyone on YouTube who can see the video, will be able to see him holding it up. And I think Scott's got his as well. The Waxing and Waning collection of Moon Knight essays. So I want to make sure I did my homework before reading the essay book. I will get onto the essays slightly later on, but I want you to tell me a little bit, Scott, about the essay book, just a bit. And why Moon Knight? Why did you write an essay book on Moon Knight? And we'll kind of go from there.
Moon Knight came out, obviously the first one I did was Judging Dredd. And Judge Dredd has been a major part of my sort of comic history, my my secret origin, if you will. With 2000 AD and my early sort of introduction to science fiction and everything else. But Moon Knight is part of my comic revival origin story. So as often the case, as you get older, sort of you drift away. And so I did in sort of late 90s. I'd read bits and pieces, which more the early 2000s. I sort of fallen by the wayside, and then I sort of started to come back a little bit with Civil War, like the original sort of Civil War story, 2005. And at the back of that, I started to pick up bits and pieces. And one of the things I picked up was the first issue, or the first collection, I should say, the first volume of 6 issues of the Huston run, Charlie Huston, and the amazing David Finch art on that, called The Bottom. And it's an interesting, because it's kind of like, it is and it isn't a jumping on point. Because those first 6 issues, it's sort of Marc Spector, obviously, is one of he's the Moon Knight
original,
system.
but the first of the we'll get into the personalities, I'm sure we delve into the essays, but of the people who make up Moon Knight, he's the original.
Yes, yeah. So he's at the bottom. He's lost everyone. Everyone's moved away from him. It's got the better of him. He's got injuries. He can't walk properly. He's sort of addicted to painkillers. And he finds a way back from the bottom at a cost. He ends up having to sort of make a sort of a literal, not so much a deal with the devil, but the deal with the Khonshu, to regain that sort of power and start sort of working his way back. And so I read that and I was just like, it's sort of a jumping on point, because it always leaves so many questions open. That everyone sort of says, "Oh, you got to read The Bottom. It's amazing, sort of, entry point." And you go, "It is," but you sort of need to know stuff to really get it. You meet sort of like Marlene in it. You meet Frenchie. You meet all these characters, but you go, "Huh? Why do they hate him? I don't understand. What's the problem? Why is this?" You sort of get bits of background. So I got into that. And picked up sort of, I think it was the second volume of that, it's called Midnight Sun, which is even more of the same. It's an amazing run.
That tie-in with Civil War and stuff is incredible.
Issue 13.
I can't wait for us to talk about that in depth, but we'll go through it, because that was sorry, I just want to chime in there and go, that's amazing.
Yeah, well, no, the issue, the second volume, Midnight Sun, that issue 13 is fantastic. We definitely will touch on it. But that Midnight Sun, it has a character in there, called Jeff, who now refers to himself as Midnight, and I'm like, but they keep talking to him about they've got a history, and it ends up being his, no spoilers, but yes, Moon Knight doesn't have many reoccurring villains. Let me put it that way. So he deals with them, but they've got this history. So again, I'm like, I need to know more. What the hell, is this? And then weirdly, sort of so I didn't really, I'd sort of, come and gone on it, and then, probably about 2009, 2010, I was in Whitby home of Dracula, North Coast, that sort of thing. And they've got some fantastic sort of bookshops there. They've got this really cool little bookshop there. And in the corner was a box. And in that box was a bunch of comics. Like, they were just sort of like 10p each, or like, sort of 10 for a pound, that kind of thing. And there was like Nomad was in there. There was some Night Thrasher, all these like 90s comics. And I was like, these are trash, but I'm gonna have a look through. I love comics. I'm gonna see.
And if they're cheap as well, like I've grabbed a few from Forbidden Planet, just a lump of like cheap comics. Oh, there's a cool variant in here.
100%.
I like.
Yeah, I was like, these look, but I also, not gonna lie, I have a bit of a soft spot for like 90s comics. Like you go, like they're kind of trash, but I kind of love them as well. Like Spawn is one of my guilty pleasures as well. But anyway, in there, I came across a whole bunch of Moon Knight comics. So I came across, it was a selection of the original Sienkiewicz and Munch run, so from the 80s. And then there was a bunch from the 1990s run, Marc Spector Moon Knight. And I was like, oh, there's more. So I sort of grabbed those, read them, and then went looking for the collected editions. And there was none.
I was going to say, Marc Spector Moon Knight, I haven't read a single issue of that because it's not anywhere. I think there's 2 issues randomly on Marvel Unlimited. Does Punisher appear in that?
Yeah.
Those the two Punisher ones. I might have read those, maybe, when I... I'll get into my Moon Knight journey in a bit, but I think I might have read those 2, but it's the only 2 on Marvel Unlimited, is the 2 with the Punisher in.
Yeah, they've got the Punisher, they've got others in it. There's Night Thrasher, and they're called they're part of a story with Spider-Man and a few others called Round Robin. So there was a story then. So yeah, I got those, and that was it then. All of a sudden I was hooked. I was like, this character is like really weird, and I don't want to understand its history. And there's no collected editions of these, so a bit of an obsession brewed. And that was it. So I've now got every single edition of Moon Knight from his original appearance in Werewolf by Night 32 all the way through to the current run. So it's a bit of an obsession.
It's a cool, as I've delved more into this, I'm like, I need to hold myself back because I've recently stopped reading quite as much Star Wars content, mainly comics. I've wound that back because I want to be able to do things like this. I wouldn't be able to do this if I was still doing comics in canon, having to read 4 to 6 comics with notes and podcasts every week. So I was like, okay, I need to wind back because I want to read some non-Star Wars stuff. And with reading all this Moon Knight, I'm like, there's still quite a lot of Moon Knight I haven't read yet. And I'm like, I can see the fun of trying to find all the Moon Knight comics because some of them are so elusive, and I'm like, if I'm now in a comic book shop or I'm in like an old school bookshop or even certain charity shops, you can find, if people don't know the value of certain things, you might just find, and so I'm going to be like, when I'm at some charity shops and they have that little rubbish comic-y thing, if there's Moon Knight, I'll definitely be grabbing some.
I've definitely bought a couple of doozies in that way, where like, and not like you say bookshops or like, back rooms of like comic shops and that sort of thing. I mean, I have two copies of Werewolf by Night 32, his original appearance. One of them isn't in great condition. It's fine, but one of them's in really good condition.
Wow.
Now, I didn't spend more than £10 on those.
And that's from 1975 as well. That's like,
So I got very lucky because since then, obviously, the ridiculousness of when the TV show came out, all of a sudden, like that original appearance and 32, and then like the Marvel Spotlight and all these other appearances he kind of made between 75 and 80 when his first run came out. All those issues became like the prices on them skyrocketed. And you just sort of like, no, you do, it's exciting as a Moon Knight fan. Oh, amazing. But they fell pretty quickly because I think the realization was, there's actually more of these about than we realized. And Moon Knight comic fans aren't as abundant as we possibly thought.
And they're not willing to part with their Moon Knight stuff necessarily. Like there might be a couple that have a couple of the same issues, or they used to be a Moon Knight fan, they've kind of fell off. But it's not like Star Wars or like, Batman or Superman, where it's like most people who are into comics probably have at least one of Batman, Superman, Spider-Man, Wolverine / X-Men, and probably Star Wars. Like, of the big ones, obviously there's certain indie ones a lot of people have, and a lot of Alan Moore, but like, you can almost guarantee if someone has more than 100 individual issues or more than like 20 trade paperbacks, you're gonna find one of those in there somewhere.
Yeah, those A-list
would be very difficult to find someone who's not only got them but willing to part with them or has more than one. Like, it's just...
Well, that's it. I mean, yeah, because, you know, you said, because there were collected... I finally found that there were collected editions of some of those early runs. But they were doing, like, the Marvel Essentials. I don't know if you know those...
Yes, the digital versions that I read on Hoopla, they were because the 4 volumes, which is collecting like all from 1975 World War Night all the way to the end of the original 80s run. Yeah,
yeah. And the thing is, they were great. You know, there's essential runs, they're kind of good, but they're done on sort of like newspaper print. They're in black and white. You know, it's not that original format. So bless, you know, Marvel for what they're doing now. They're reprinting a hell of a lot more. Their essential collection and their, you know, the complete collections and all that kind of stuff. They've gone through.
What I've read actually, because I read the color ones, so I think I might.
That's what I was going to say. So it's the
one, sorry.
It's So you got. I'm just going to get. So you got like these ones. The essential.
That's what. Yeah, that's the one that I've read.
Sorry, the Epic collections. So they've got the Epic collections. Yeah. And this reprints everything, and they're in great. You know, the wonderfully bright and vibrant colors. And they always come with all the sort of the backups, and you know, whenever they had like a page at the back or there was drawings and all that sort of stuff. So you get some really good stuff with them. So I think they've done a good job, you know. And also, you can, if you want, they've got the Marvel omnibus editions now. They're doing them in those as well. So if you want the big oversized editions, like they've got them in that as well. So yeah, Marvel is doing my boy well, I think, at this point. Like he's doing. So yeah, it's an interesting thing. You mean you said about the Marvel Marc Spector Moon Knight, because that's a fun. It's an odd run. It's the longest Moon Knight run. It runs to 60 issues.
Oh my god, I forgot that, because I always think the longest run's the original run. Yeah, because obviously 38, I think, was it?
38 is
but no, wow, that's 60 issues to
60 issues.
58 of them to basically just completely disappear off the face of the earth. But not all the other issues some of the other issues you can kind of get. The one-off when he's in like Secret Avengers and things like that, I think they're easier to get now, but the kind of when he was guest starring a lot seemed to be the harder ones. But of those runs, like pretty much all the other ones were loosely available, but Marc Spector Moon Knight is just like to the wind. Yeah,
no, it's an odd. It's the reason for it. So you'll actually in the book. So in the book, we interview Chuck Dixon, slightly controversial figure, but he was, you know, curmudgeonly, but you know, very sort of open about it. He wrote the first, I think, 25 issues of Marc Spector Moon Knight, and he gave us some great stuff. You know, he brought back sort of like Bushman. He gave us sort of, you know, reintroduced sort of Scarlet, Stained Glass Scarlet, and these other things. Sort of, and he introduced like Jeff Wild, all these characters that sort of came into it, and he made sort of Moon Knight, as he saw him, was sort of like, the guy's a CIA operative. You know, he's a former soldier. He's going to have these issues, so they're going to make him a bit more international, and then we're going to go off and do stuff. And it's really good. It's a good sort of, you know, it feels like a solid run. And because of this, I mean, yeah, we're going to talk about the connections to Batman, but like, you know, some of the stuff that he did for Marc Spector Moon Knight, you know, was up where DC were like, oh, let's bring Chuck back and we'll have him do all the Batman stuff. So, you know, but as is the want with the 90s and Marvel in particular, after a while, it just sort of gets very trashy and very disposable. And after Chuck Dixon's run, it sort of starts to fall apart a little bit. At one point, Mark literally falls apart. Like he has this sort of, not just a degenerative illness, but like he's literally rotting, and so he ends up with like an adamantium suit.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, that's not where I thought that was going to go.
No,
okay.
He ends up with an adamantium suit. He takes on like Doctor Doom, and after that, it sort of just becomes a whole list of like throwaway villains, and it's all become they introduce in the most recent run they've talked about his Shadow Council, like they've referenced that, and that comes from the Marc Spector Moon Knight run. Like he has Spectre Tower, like he owns Spectre Corporation, or is it Spectre Corp? I think.
Oh God, yeah. I think something like that.
Yeah, so because the personalities like disappear, and not even the personalities, like the disguises in that early run. And then you have Spectre Tower, and at the top of Spectre Tower, you have the I forget what he calls it now, but they basically have this area where they get together and they basically have a council meeting, and he uses all these different advisors.
Yeah.
And yeah, it goes a bit silly, and it ends with issue 60. Unsurprisingly, like Mark dies. They kill off Moon Knight in quite a spectacular way, but he takes on like another version of another sort of Egyptian god, Seth or Set, and the last couple of issues are about the 90s things you can imagine.
I wonder, is that where Seth's come from? Because in one of the Moon Knight runs, they mentioned Seth being some sort of villain. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly
in one of either the Lemire run or it might have been the Huston or Ellis run. There's a mention of Seth in one.
It's in Lemire's. I think it's Lemire.
Yeah, and I was like, what the? And I was like, I'm reading a lot of Moon Knight stuff.
Yeah.
If I just don't know what Seth is, that's fine. Maybe it's an Egyptian god thing I don't know about, or maybe it's bigger in the Marvel universe at the time and I just didn't know. But now that you've answered that question, so he's from the run that's disappeared.
That you can't get. But the last couple of issues were drawn. I think the last sort of 4 to 6 issues were drawn by a guy called Stephen Platt, who is. He's a great artist, but it's so insanely like 90s. Like everybody, if you think Rob Liefeld does odd body proportions, check out some Stephen Platt. Like, people can't put their legs together; their thighs are that massive. Shoulders that can hold up mountains, kind of thing. But it's all bombastic and it's huge and it's sort of like overly drawn. Every piece of concrete or brick is cracked and everything has got, it's always raining. Like there's lines galore on it. But it's cool. And so, yeah, it's a good run. But Marvel just seems to have forgotten it. Like they just sort of went, we're going to move on.
So the artwork, it does look cool. So I was just looking it up. I didn't want to seem rude, but it's, I've seen some of the artwork there. It's quite cool, but yeah, it's 90s edgy. It's not quite as edgy as the early 2000s. We'll get there, but sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, but there's this weird like 60s run that's very hit and miss. This 60 issue run, very hit and miss, and it's just sort of been forgotten. They are bringing it back, so in the Epic collections, they're now getting to it, so they are reprinting it, and it is going to be in the omnibus run. I'm very excited for that because I think there are some really, really good issues in those the early part of the run. So yeah.
So I was going to say, because I want to delve, because talking about Moon Knight, I want to delve into each of these runs. But just quick, I know you mentioned why you love Moon Knight and things. With the essay book itself, what made you choose, because obviously you did Judging Dredd and things, was Moon Knight just like, is he just because he's your most important sort of Marvel character or one of the most important characters to you in comics? And you're like, I've got a lot to say about him. Let's see what the rest of the internet and people I know do as well.
Yeah, it was really. I mean, as you said before about sort of, the fandom for Moon Knight is quite devoted. Like there's there's a fantastic podcast called Into the Night podcast that's devoted. That's a sort of a Moon Knight podcast, and they have their own sort of like Facebook group that's very sort of active. There's the Moon Knight Core website group. They came up with the now renowned meme of Dracula owing Moon Knight money, which we'll get to, which is mentioned in the book. I think I'll even show it just for people to see. It's the, I know you're here, Dracula, you big fucking nerd. Where's my goddamn money?
Yeah.
And people just assumed that was like, they were like, what comic's this from? And you're like, none, it's a meme. Like, and they've done lots of stuff like that people just seem to think are from actual comics. But, so there's a real sort of like committed fan base. And interesting is, obviously Julian obviously runs Sequart, so I have a little bit of an advantage where I just sort of like throw out ideas and Julian's like, yeah, cool, let's go for it. Let's give it a go, like make it work. And I have things to say, and just talking to people, like, I was just like, yeah, there's some interesting ideas here. I start, the way I do the books, it's just the same for Dredd and it's the same for Moon Knight, was I'd like write up a list of ideas. So I sort of like, I don't want to start with a blank piece of paper. So I've like a list of ideas. So I'm thinking, all right, well, we've got a Jewish superhero that is, an avatar of an Egyptian god. Like that. So there's religious aspects of this. You've obviously got the personalities and sort of like the, dissociative disorder. That's an aspect of it. The Batman comparison. The fact the guy's been changed that many times and died, and his backstory seems to change like repeatedly. So there's like all these different parts that you can pull on. Like the Lemire run in itself is worth at least one look, and so all those bits and pieces. So I have that list, and then people came to me and were like, "Oh, I want to do that," or actually, I want to talk about the art. I want to do comparisons of art across. I want to talk about Bill Sinkovich's art and how he sort of does things or those kinds of things. So people sort of build up what they wanted to do. And I'll just let them go. I'll go, okay, give me a pitch, and then we'll start it. And then I let them go off and do things. And so, yeah, that's it, really. Originally I started off with 14 people, including myself, and it got dwindled down. It often does. I know that's going to be the case. People fall off, life gets in the way, or they'd realize they've bitten off more than they can chew. But I was very fortunate. A lot of the people that have contributed are, either academics and professionals in the or have written substantially for like comic book resources or other places. So there's some really good stuff in there. And one of the ones I was kind of nervous about is the essay "We Are Moon Knight"
by Lena. Is that right?
Lena. Yeah. So she reached out to me, and again, I still sort of struggle with this kind of thing. It's sort of like so. So Lena is Lena Vincent of the Douglas J. Vincent system. So she is a personality or an identity within a system. And so she emailed me, and she's part of the Moon Knight into the Night Moon Knight podcast, sort of like active group. She's very active in that. And she was like, I would really like to contribute my perspective being a member of a system, and knowing DID and how it's treated in the sort of in medical circles and so on and so forth. And I was kind of nervous about that because I'm like, without sounding horrible, like the skeptic jumps in, and I'm like, all right, am I being taken for a ride? I don't want to look like a pillock, kind of thing. So I spoke to Julian about it, and he was like, look, if they're genuine, it's a really cool and amazing opportunity for them to have a voice and be taken serious. If not, we'll sort of we'll do our due diligence, and we'll just put it in the book. So it is what it is. No, there's no real loss there.
Yeah.
So I had a conversation with them and communicated with them, and they were fantastic. To the extent that it's fantastic. It's amazing. I mean, it's an amazing sort of honest, piece of writing that really does sort of, when I read it the first time, I had to sort of like, seriously, I stepped away and I was like, because there's a part of me, because I'm doing a book about a character that sort of has DID and it's been used, erroneously numbers of times. So there's a part of me was going like, am I doing this the right way? Is it, is this essay going to end up being sort of, I don't know. Am I looking to have this in? Am I trying to be salacious? Am I looking for for the clickbait of it sort of thing? So I really had to consider it. But no, she's fantastic, and the essay is brilliant. And so I really appreciate it, her honesty and her openness around that. However, I would also say that Lenya in particular and the Douglas J. Vincent system overall has actually been picked up and helped the current writer Jed Mackay in sort of how to approach. So obviously in the most current run, Mark, Stephen, and how's that gone? Jake, thank you. Jesus Christ, that got out of my brain. I have a therapist, and they talk it through. And Lenya has helped that in sort of form that. And at the end in issue 30, at the end of the most recent run, got a personal thank you and stuff from Jim McKay. So it's cool that that's what the fan base is. And that's not the first time those kinds of things happened. In when Max Bemis did his run several years ago, And he did sort of like, Crazy Runs in the Family was sort of like, this whole thing, and he had Moon Knight versus Ra and all those kinds of things. And I got in contact with him through the Moon Knight podcast, Into the Night, because I really wanted to, because we were just starting the book. We were just starting the book at that point. I was trying to sort of find out, is it possible to speak to people? And because Max Bemis has a punk band as well.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
And he was in the UK and he was appearing in it, and he said to me, he says, I can speak to you briefly. We'll see if we can set up an interview or something over Zoom and stuff. Because he's very open about his mental health issues and sort of like he's had anxiety and depression and other things. And so he sort of has been open about that and brings it to his writing. So I met him very, very briefly whilst we were at this punk concert. He was at the NEC. I think it was the NEC or maybe the World's Arena, one of the World's Resort. But yeah, I met him at this punk concert. Spoke to him for like 15 minutes. He was like, I've really got to go. Really, really nice guy. Wonderful guy. But we never got able to get together to have the full Moon Knight conversation. And so he emailed me really apologetically and says, look, I'm going to throw something into the final issue of my run. Keep an eye out for your name. And I was like, what? So anyway, Ray, who runs the Into the Night podcast, I mentioned it to him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, check out this panel." So if you go into the run, in fact, I'm going to get it for you.
Do it. I haven't read his run, I don't think.
Yeah, it's a good run. It's got some fun. Again, it's got some really good stuff in it. It goes back sort of like to like Moon Knight's original trauma and this other thing. But in the very sort of final issue, there's a panel where they're all sort of stood together. But I find it now.
In a trade paperback,
in a trade.
It's like trying to find pages in a trade. It's like, oh my lord, or in an omnibus, God forbid. You're like, okay, this will take me all day to find one page out of the hundreds.
It's infuriating, isn't it? Because you sort of go,
I just need to look at this thing quick, and then you're flicking and you're like, wait a minute, this is like nowhere near what I'm looking for. And then you go, okay, I'll flick a few pages forward. You're like, where am I in this gigantic story? Where is this panel taking place?
The amount of times I've done that, I'd say. Here we go. Right. So you'll see the hosts of the Into the Night podcast are Ray, Connor, and Rebecca. And you can about how you see it. You can see these people here.
Yeah.
You've got Ray, Connor, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you see this guy at the back?
Oh, yeah.
It says on it, Great Scott.
That's amazing. That is so cool. You're in the Moon Knight comics. That's amazing.
Yeah. So I'm canon. I'm in Marvel canon is what I am. I'm waiting for my MCU appearance.
Are you going to come back as your wrestling persona? Is that going to be your...
Yeah, that'll be it.
Oh.
But that's the kind of thing I think with Moon Knight, because it's not Iron Man, because it's not Captain America or Black Panther or one of those sort of like prime A-list characters where and I know things like there's often art jokes and stuff in some of those. Every artist does that kind of thing, but because you can sort of mess with Moon Knight a bit more, the breadth of what you can do with him is a bit wider. The contributors and the writers and stuff to it have always been like really open to the fans. And so it's a really sort of, it's just so openly, especially in the last sort of like, I don't know, last 10 years, it's been a really openly embraced sort of community in the books and stuff. And because the books have been, especially since Lemire's run, I'd say, have been very open about saying like, we're going to deal with the fact like his mental health, Mark's mental health and the DID and all that sort of thing is no longer a gimmick. It's almost like, it's no longer a bug, it's a feature. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's been treated with a lot more respect, and not that the people didn't respect it before, but it's been treated with a lot more sort of reverence, I suppose, and sort of like and in doing so, I think fans have embraced it even more. So it's a really cool group to be a part of.
Well, that's amazing. Yeah, brilliant. So we'll delve in because I've gone on this Moon Knight journey. So people, links in the description to everything that Scott's just spoken about, and check out episode 123 of this podcast. If you don't know who Moon Knight is very well, I mean, the Disney Plus shows, it was quite a good place to start. For me, I had a little one up. I read some of the 80s run before the Disney Plus show, but the Disney Plus show really got me hooked.
Yeah.
So if you haven't even watched that, go watch that. It's brilliant. But also check out episode 123 of this podcast, where Scott gives a great sort of introduction to that, and the Superheroes for Dummies podcast on the Comics in Motion Network. That's like a proper deep dive into it as well. Loads of great ways to start with him. But Moon Knight. So I've read his Werewolf by Night appearance. I've read the 2-issue Spider-Man involvement team up, which I think is around that time as well. And then I've read 1 or 2 other bits and pieces. Then I've read the whole 80s run of his first full run of himself. Yeah. And then I've mentioned some of the other ones, but we'll get onto that shortly. But the Doug, is it Moench? Or Moench?
Monch. I've never always just pronounced it Monch. I'm probably wrong, but yeah.
Doug. Good old Doug. Doug, obviously, who was writing Werewolf by Night, basically created the character of Moon Knight as an antagonist.
But it was.
Bill. Was it Bill who created the?
I think let me double check, because I've got to double check, because it was
the antagonist of in a Werewolf by Night story. From 1975.
It was Doug Moench who wrote the original. Yeah, I was going to talk. It's Don Perlin who was the artist. That's what I was thinking. Yes.
Yeah. So essentially, Moon Knight was created as an antagonist in a 2-issue sort of arc in Werewolf by Night, which I've read, which is cool. And then he popped up in lots of random little bits, including like the end story, like a bonus story in the Hulk magazine for a while, and bits and pieces. So I haven't read those. Because obviously this was kind of me doing the abridged Moon Knight experience, trying to get an idea of all of the eras kind of Moon Knight, and the essays really helped that. I think I've read all the runs that the essays go into in detail, which really had. Obviously, you recommended. You said these 3 are quite essential, and then Tony said also the Lemire run's really good, and this other one, and obviously Tony's essays about that too. So it's a nice, good package from the 2 of you. But I was trying to decide which of these, the ones I read that I enjoyed the most. So and I keep going back and forth on this, because when we first spoke, I read the Moench run. I got to, I think, issue 15-ish or so through that, and I was enjoying it, but nothing was really hooking me. I was like, this is cool, this is nice, but I wasn't quite gripped. So I kind of, and because of Star Wars comics and canon, I was having to find like very small pockets of time to be able to read stuff. So I ended up just not reading it before the series, but I had like a good idea of who Moon Knight was at the time. Watched the Disney Plus series that I absolutely adore, that upon the rewatch that I rewatched recently as well, to ready for this podcast and to get me a good understanding again. I think it is my favorite Disney Plus Marvel series. I absolutely adore it.
It's one. Oscar Isaac does a phenomenal.
Oh my god, so good. I agree with you completely. It's phenomenal. So I rewatched that, and so now going back into this, the 80s run, I can't decide if it's my favorite, if it's the best. I think it is, regardless of how you look at it, it is completely essential. Although every issue isn't strictly speaking essential, I feel like you can't read any of the follow-on runs cohesively, really, without reading at least the first half, but I'd probably say all of the 80s run. You really need to get an idea of who the character was, because every iteration builds off of that 100%. Original, even though there's retcons and all kinds of other things. And there's just so much. I'd say my favorite thing about that run, is the subtlety and the idea of Khonshu in that run, where you don't know if he's really there, and Mark halfway through as the run has that kind of breakdown about when the statue gets stolen by Bushmen.
Well, even before that, I think it might be even that same issue. Like, he confesses to French. He's like, even I don't know. But Mark's kind of like, I don't even know if it's real or not.
Yeah.
Like,
and he has the existential crisis that Marlene has to bring him out of, and all these elements. But it's always, and the identities the lines get blurred between them a little bit. There's moments where he's like, who am I again? Oh, I'm Jake. Oh, and he speaks to Marlene, and she's like, why are you talking like that? And he's like, oh, sorry, I haven't switched yet. There's little bits, but it's very subtle, and the social commentary and all that. It's the one thing I think I really miss about the runs that come after this, although I think I do prefer most of the runs after to a degree, because I think the general story, some of the dialogue is quite hard going in the 80s because it's 80s comics, but the subtlety of the different personalities and the way they're used, mixed with, you never really know about Khonshu, if he's real or not, or if it's like the wind that comes into one of the scenes in the tomb. I love that subtlety, and I feel like my enjoyment of that subtlety almost is enough to make me like it more than the other stuff, even though the other stuff is written better, I think, in certain ways. Do you know where I'm kind of coming from?
I know exactly what you mean. I 100% agree with the fact you're saying that it's essential. Like, there are issues, there are throwaway issues. Like, don't get me wrong. But there are definitely there's of that 38 issue run, there are issues that are essential. Like you have to read those kind of those stories. I also agree with what you're saying. I mean, the fact of the matter is, this whole thing around whether Khonshu is real or not, it's been played out a number of times. To the extent of now that he isn't, like we've gone completely the other way. Like Khonshu is now an actual physical or at least spiritual entity within the Marvel universe. But you're right. Like it goes back to, I mean, issue 1 of that 80s run had a tough job on its hands because you had got sort of like 5 years of this kind of mishmash of like farting around as a hero. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you have, because it's sort of, we've got to sort of he basically has a face turn for like 5 years. He's a villain, and even in his sort of follow-ups issues, that's still a little bit there, and so they sort of cement him as a good guy. And those Hulk magazine backups are fantastic. We'll get to those because they're written by Munch and drawn by Bill Sienkiewicz as well. They're the first things that those two came together on. And what they sort of act as a like a playground. They're like a trial, like a pilot.
Pilot almost, yeah.
For like how they're going to work this out. And then they get a run off they get their own first issue. So that first issue, though, has to set up a brand new origin story. So it's a whole, because we're like, oh, no, the committee didn't give him his costume and his name and all the other stuff, like to fight a werewolf. Oh, no. Moon Knight came from this incident where in the Sudan, he, was involved with this terrorist or this bandit Bushman, and he was killed or he wasn't, at the foot of the Khonshu statue. So that first issue is like a real sort of a reset. It's probably one of the hardest resets any superheroes ever had.
And it's the most it's the one thing I think for every run that is the one. It's like the Uncle Ben of Spider-Man.
100%
for Moon Knight. Every run, whether or not they interpret if he died or not, and Khonshu's involvement and what he was kind of doing there, regardless of the interpretation, the event was him and Bushman. There was a lot of killing involved, and he was left for dead. And there was, and Khonshu was, and there was a Khonshu statue there. All of the details can be added or changed, but that basically sentence is the core Uncle Ben part of Moon Knight that cannot be changed in any of the future runs.
Yeah, 100%. It is. There are certain, superheroes that just have it. This is Crime Alley. This is Frank Castle's family being shot. Like it's fundamental. That has to be there because it's sort of one of the things it does. That it establishes in Mark that he wasn't a good guy. One of the things that sort of even Doug Munch sort of makes quite clear. Marc Spector's not a good guy. Like, he wants to be, but at his heart, like, he knows he's done some terrible stuff. The point that the reason he's there in the Sudan is to rob an archaeological dig and kill everyone there. That's why he's there. And he has a change of heart and sort of ends up fighting Bushmen. But beyond that, from that issue on, issue 2 is called Slasher. And then issue 3 is another short story. Like, they're all just a bunch of one-offs. And they're fun. They're fun. But they kind of just, they're throwaway. I mean, the Slasher one is interesting because it does introduce like Crowley. It's sort of like, they're like worlds, building, but in a soft kind of way. Do you know what I mean? So the first 3, because number 3 introduces Midnight Man, who's an art thief. And so it's really about introducing all these little characters that are going to play a bigger part later on. So it's sort of like the first, I'd say, 5 issues of that 80s run are like, okay, we've established Moon Knight. Issue 2, we're going to establish Crowley and his sort of tragedy, and we're going to introduce the diner and Gina's diner, her 2 sons. You're going to we're going to establish Marlene. We're going to establish Frenchie. So those sort of first 5 issues really do a lot of that. They build a lot of that relationships up, and it starts to introduce the they're not personalities at this point. The disguises, the different characters: Jake, Lockley, Stephen Grant, Marc Spector, and Moon Knight. So you're right, those first 5 issues are kind of important because they do all that, but they're a bit like throwaway stories. They're kind of silly. So yeah, but they are kind of important. Because as I say, it builds up to other stories. But one of the interesting things about the you say about the subtlety. I'll stop talking. You can ask a question, but one of the subtlety.
No, I specifically want you to talk about the subtlety. I'm interested.
One of the things about the subtlety of that, as you say, is exactly what they were trying to do. So even like Doug mentioned, sort of says there's interviews, and they're in all the collected editions. There's a couple of interviews he's done where he was like, "Oh no, they're just disguises. There is no multiple personality disorder." Like he was dead against it. He was like, "Oh no, there might be some confusion, but that's sort of like more linked with potentially like what we would consider to be PTSD now." But like you say, you are right. There are scenes where he'll come in as Jake, or he's leaving as Jake, and he's like gruff, and he's sort of short with people, and he'll leave in his khaki, and Marlene's like, "Oh Christ," But then he'll switch to Stephen, and out and out, she prefers Stephen. Like throughout the first
everyone by a long shot.
Yeah,
like I think she actively dislikes Marc Spector and is quite indifferent to Jake Lockley. And she's like, "I just want you to be Stephen all the time."
Yes,
and there's one or two issues where they talk about it, and she's like, "If it was up to me, I would just want you to always be Spector." And then he's looking through like his old video footage of him Spector because he can't let go. I think it's when his dad's passing away and things. It's like she feels like she's finally kind of getting Steve back, and it's just back to Spector, and he's just in this. Sorry, yeah.
No, you're right, and that's the thing. That's why I think it's so good. Is that different people want different things from him? So everyone sort of talks about his ability to sort of pull from different, to slide into those personalities. But over time, pressure gets put on each of those personalities. So Mark technically is Moon Knight. When he is out kicking ass and taking names, he's Marc Spector. Like he's leaning on his CIA training and his military career. There is no fourth personality that is Moon Knight per se. But like you say, Gina and the Sons and Crowley and his others, they all like Jake. Like they all know Jake as the taxi cab. So they sort of put a little bit of, not huge amount of pressure on, but there's a bit of pressure on him there to be Jake, to be a man of the streets, to be a man of the people.
Because in Crowley and the kids, he gives them jobs and he kind of gets the kids off the streets in a bit. And Gina's like, "I like you giving my boys something to do because you protect them, but you give them money as well and you teach them stuff. And because of you, they're trying to do all these stuff." So as you've correctly put, Jake is the ground level. There's one of the essays, which I'm sure we'll delve into, is about how one of the interesting things about Moon Knight as a character is he can fit into every social class, which is no one else can. Iron Man's super rich. Peter Parker's quite poor. Peter Parker can't interact with millionaires. No. Batman can interact with millionaires and basically,
beat up
the scum on the street. There's no middle. There's no Batman going to like Walmart. That's not a thing. Whereas when it comes to Marc Spector, he's got the three kind of layers of the social class, as well as Moon Knight, which is superhero and kind of can go behind the scenes of police investigations, crime scenes. So he's got this. He can kind of explore the whole world in this way, to a degree.
You're right, and that's the thing. We all have stresses in our lives. We've all got pressures put upon us, and I think that's one of the key things of in interpretation of it now is like you can see the pressures that get put on each of the personalities. So as he shifts between them, he knows he would probably like as a method actor, let's say, right? He wants to turn up at home after having been out as Moon Knight. He wants to chill out as Marc Spector, all right? Or if he's getting ready to go out in the street, okay, I've got to get ready, put on the moustache, chew the match or whatever. Got to go out and become Jake Lockley. But you're right, he's going, but I can't do that now because Marlene, I know I've got to be nice to Marlene because it's just the pressures at home. Like he's in a relationship with her. Like he wants to be happy with her. He wants her to be happy. But the fact of the matter is, like, Marc Spector's well aware, as you said, like she doesn't like Marc Spector. She does not like his history. And so she likes Stephen Grant because he's a nicer person. He's the rich one. He's the philanthropist, all that kind of stuff. So when it sort of comes down to him starting to have those blend together and have to face up to them, it was kind of, I think Doug Moench had sort of written himself into a bit of a corner quite early on, where he's like, oh, they've become popular and they've all sort of got a life of their own, and I've got to try and fix that a little bit. And so he does, he addresses it. But as you say, it becomes a core of the character then. Those slipping between names and stuff becomes a tenet of the character. However, nowadays, if you were to ask someone, tell me three things about Moon Knight, you'd be like, Khonshu, his personality disorder, and he wears a white hood. Like you'd probably he's a white costume. Okay, cool. But the fact of the matter is, the true sort of establishment of it being of being able to slip between personalities and then being separate identities does not happen until until the Lemire run. That's when it really gets cleared up.
Because in the 2006 run, it's not even the personalities. Just the alters pretty much just get wiped, don't they? It's all about Mark at the bottom without his.
He's abandoned. Well, the point, he's abandoned by everyone, even those potential sort of identities. And in that run, it transitions. He moves from Sean Huston to other writers, and they've got towards the end. I think it's called Down in Mexico, or Down South. It's called, and in that he ends up just using the Jake Lockley name. It's still
I only read
Mark.
the first 2 volumes of that to clarify to you and the audience. Yeah.
Oh, it's amazing. So that last run, right? That last sort of, we'll get on to some of the craziness, but it includes him fighting against and alongside with the Punisher 2 luchador wrestler mercenaries, and they're amazing. So like stuff like that is great. But he just uses the name Jake, and then it sort of becomes more of a thing. As you go along, and one of the reasons that it had to be cleaned up, we'll get back to it, is because we'll talk about it later. It became messy post Houston run. It started to get kind of messy, and Warren Ellis and Jeff Lemire sort of like cleared the decks and sort of set that new sort of state. But going back to the 80s, you're right about the subtlety, because the other thing that sort of Munch was looking to do, and he was able to do. And that's why that essay, which I think is so fantastic about those different classes, is so important. It leads on to another essay which talks about the social commentary that Munch brings in with his run. So, we have issues. There's a couple that really stand out. One of my favorites is it's about a music box. It's about like gangs on the street and stuff.
Lenny, I think, is the kid, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's about him sort of, he gets caught between his mum and the local people that live in the neighborhood, and the gang that he sort of runs with. And you have this idea that he hasn't really got a choice. Like, he's poor, he's on the street, can't find work. So the gang is sort of got his back, but the gang are now sort of trying to sort of, what's the word? Like, strong arm the local people.
Yeah, it's a protection racket, isn't
it? Yeah, kind of sort of thing. And Moon Knight sort of gets in the middle of it. But it's about choosing a side. You don't, for want of a better phrase, you don't shit on your doorstep. You know what I mean? It's sort of, but if in the 80s, I mean, you've seen The Warriors. I mean, there's
I love that film. Yeah,
that's a hyper version of what people thought New York was, but it's not hugely far off. Like, there are photos and video footage of these sort of gangs in the leather biker jackets and all that kind of stuff with ridiculous names like Savage Sharks and all that kind of stuff. And so he tried to confront that. And these issues pop up. Even like Stained Glass Scarlet, there's a whole thing in there. She ends up having to face off against her son, who's a criminal, because he ended up becoming a criminal because his dad was a criminal, and the police shot him down. And so it's sort of like, what's it like, the sins of the father sort of thing. But there's a moment in that one. I think it's in that one. Either in Stained Glass Starlight, or it might be there's another one. But I think it's that. We have Marlene and Mark, and they're talking about the pointlessness of guns. And it's all about shooting. And it's the issue comes out a year after the shooting of John Lennon. Because
I looked it up when I was reading it. I was like, oh, they're mentioning Lennon a lot, and they cry about it, don't they? And I was like, this must have been. And I looked at the date, and I was like, oh yeah, this is fresh off almost.
Yeah.
It was written before. Yeah.
And so it sort of celebrates almost the anniversary of his death. But then they mention it that she's playing the Beatles on the piano, and they have this thing, and it just says like it's about the pointlessness of guns, sort of. And at the end of that, like, Mark refuses to pull the trigger. He refuses to stand down from something being shot and stuff. And the fact that like Stained Glass has got to sort of shoot her son. So there's those kinds of issues. But one of the most famous ones is an issue called Hit It.
Mm-hmm.
Which is quite well renowned. It's it's not even a full issue. It's probably 2/3 of an issue because it's got a backup and stuff. But it's this guy who's just furious, and he's going around. It's sort of the writing the panels and stuff are different stories. So your captions are talking about jazz music and the beat of the drum and this sort of thing and how it sort of plays out and sort of thing. And then you've got this guy going around just punching people. Like, whoever gets in his way, he's just knocking them out. And he's getting furious and he's angry. And you've got this thing, it's just called Hit It. And it's this idea of, just the throb of it all. But what you start to learn is like Moon Knight sort of sees him in an altercation and decides to take him out. And you realise that the guy has lost, this guy's dad has just died. And he's confused because in his grief, he's also having to confront the fact that his dad used to beat him on a regular basis. And so you get this issue of like all these like roiling emotions of this guy's like, I'm distraught at the death of my father, but I never confronted him. I never got to punch him back kind of thing. And the end of the issue, like Moon Knight tries to talk him down and he can't. And so Moon Knight has to basically ends up punching him out so the police can take him away. And Moon Knight stands at the end of the issue sort of with his head in his hands. And it's like, when will the violence stop? And so there's this whole, all of a sudden you go, I've just read an issue about child abuse and generational violence from the early 80s. And I'm kind of shocked. And also more than that, it's a beautifully drawn issue. Like, it's stunning.
But then you go to the next issue, and it's just another, I can't remember what the issue is directly after that, but it's basically just a goofy Moon Knight-esque story. And they're the goofy issues are the ones in that run where I'm like, what is this? Where is this going? What is this doing? It feels very much like 80s comics, and I'm not the biggest fan of... to be honest, pre-90s there was a lot of great stuff pre-90s, don't get me wrong, in comics, but for me, apart from some of the really heavy hitter stories, when I read some other stuff from before that era, even some of the Golden Age, which I know is going back, decades prior, I do just find some of the language, and either there's the parts which is in this 80s run where there's just so much text of exposition. I was explaining it to Megan, and I was saying it's hard because I think the 80s run is better in a lot of ways than the Huston run, but the Huston run grabs me in a different way because it's some of the issues you can skim through in like 4 minutes because it's all visual. There's not that much talking because it's all, you learn what's happening by visual aid. And in a lot of the early comics, and I blame partly Spider-Man for this because it still happens in a lot of Spider-Man comics, which is every single action that the character takes, they have to think and explain why they're doing it. And it's like, oh my God, they're getting away in the car. I better get my grapple hook. Then the next scene is him. Cool, I've got my grapple hook. Now just to throw it and get it right. And then it hits the car. And it's like, great, my grapple hook's got a tight edge to it now. Now I can grab onto it. Oh, the car's moving quite fast while I'm holding on to, and you're like, if you didn't put any text in these 5 panels and you just showed Moon Knight in 3 panels throwing a grappling hook to the back of a moving car and moving forward, I would understand that he's thinking about doing that.
But you don't need them, do you?
No,
I think,
and that's what I struggle with in that run.
I agree, and I know what you're saying. I do. I 100% am with you on that. I think this is the problem with. Let's put it this way, because it's in context, it's in historical. That's how 80s comics were written.
Exactly.
Right. We'd moved away from thought bubbles, and then we got panels instead. Right, you get the text box instead. It's just the way it is. But you're right, it's quite hard. But I think actually, what you'll find what I find with some of the Munch run is you're 100% right, and I think I'm just got Hit It in front of me, and I'm looking through it now, and I'm stunned by how great this issue is.
Oh, it's amazing.
Like, there's a whole section here that sort of it starts with the whole issue, the front page. This is a Moon Knight comic, right? And the cover is it's Moon Knight punching a guy in the face or threatening to punch a guy in the face. And behind it, and I'll just show it to you, right? Like, behind it is a kid's scribbled drawing on a piece of notepaper of an adult hitting a child. Mm-hmm. And so you clearly have this sort of, juxtaposition of Moon Knight being the authority figure punching this and then the parent figure, right? So you're watching that going like, Christ, what's that about? And then you open it up and it says, first there is black, then there is light and all the colours of jazz. And then there is sound in these colours. And it goes on for 2 pages about jazz.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, hang on, sorry, what?
It's quite Alan Moore-esque in certain ways. Yeah. You read certain Alan Moore and you're like we spoke about Miracle Man quite a lot. And you're like, the writing of this is amazing. Like, if you took this out of this comic, it'd be great. But some of this feels a bit much. I don't need an 8-page poem on the existentialism to understand that Miracle Man is now omniscient and omnipotent.
Yeah.
I don't quite need that level of like prose to comprehend a comic I'm reading necessarily. But he does that. Like it's really well written in the Moon Knight stuff.
It is,
and a lot of it really does add things. When there's those high issues like Hit It and the Scarlet Lady one, so those when you've got those bubbles, the text bits at the top, you're like, this adds a lot. It gives feeling, but it's the filler issues that are not only a thug of the week, but also then exposition of things you're literally watching. And it's such a weird thing. I'm like, some of these issues are probably some of the best written and most clever issues of Marvel comics I've read. And then the next one is just utter tat. And you're like, why are there 38 issues of this? If this was 20 issues, I think this would be one of the best. I've not read a huge amount, so take what I say with a pinch of salt, but one of the best comic runs of this age.
Oh, 100%.
If it was just 20 issues and it was perfect, you could not debate that. But it's just, it's Buffy the Vampire Slayer syndrome. Almost every out of three issues, 2 will be good, or one might be amazing. But then one's either okay or a bit like, what? And it's just
completely off the boil.
You just have to take it with it, don't you? Because it's so.
I think what when because we interviewed obviously Bill Sienkiewicz for the book and speaking to, because I want to talk about the art on that very quickly in a minute. One of the things that they seem to get away with, like no one was sort of paying attention to Moon Knight because they were just sort of like, we've got other things, we're doing this Moon Knight run, do your thing. I mean, they've got brought together to do the Hulk backups because they needed a backup and they were like, oh, we could use Moon Knight. I mean, Bill Sienkiewicz is, just to get onto his art, because his art is so phenomenal in some of these issues.
Love it.
He just turned, this is a different time, like he'd done some early stuff, but he was working I think he was at college at the time. He just turned up at Marvel offices, sat in reception with his portfolio and was trying to show it to people. And they were like, yeah, wait there. And he sat there and waited. And one of the editors, whose name escapes me now, basically came out and said, you need to go speak to Neil Adams. And he was like, where is he? And he was like, oh, I'll go get him. And they brought him out and he showed him this stuff. And they were like, cool. Have you heard of Moon Knight? And they just gave him the job.
That's so cool.
So he was like, yeah, all right, we're going to team you up with this guy, Doug. And you're going to do these backups. We'll see how it goes. And when you sort of see those backups, those original backups, he was considered, and when you look at his more recent stuff, you can't even imagine this. He was considered like a Neil Adams. Oh, yes, it was Denny O'Neil he spoke to, sorry. Denny O'Neil was who was doing the sort of this run editing. He was considered like a Neil Adams knockoff.
Oh, okay.
So if you look at like the Neil Adams art for, the late 70s, early 80s Batman, Batman's very sort of like slim. He's sort of like gymnastic. It's sort of very sort of fluid. And it's beautiful. I mean, he's a fantastic artist. He was sort of emulating that in many respects. And it looks great. It really does. And he thought that's what he had to do. And then as they sort of developed, and again, when you read those first couple of Moon Knight issues, he gets a little looser and a little scratchier. But by the time you get to sort of like issue 20, it's quite clear that like they're a bit like, no, nobody's checking. Let's try and do something a little different. And so all of a sudden, like the stories become a little bit more social conscious. The panel construction becomes different. The art becomes much more experimental. It becomes almost a graphic design experiment in some cases rather than panel layouts.
The use of lighting, I would say, in around this era, before it became like fully digital. I don't know how they did it in this time, but obviously you read a modern comic now, or even really probably post 2000s ish of Marvel stuff, and you go, it looks phenomenal what they can do, but it's on a computer. A lot of them are either done or enhanced on the computer. When you see this and you go, how did someone do it when it was just ink and paper, or paint and paper, like how, and you see it and you just go, the way that they had to cleverly use, when they didn't have infinite resources and Photoshop or whatever to be able to help with it, when it was just pen and paper, and the way they do lighting, and it's like, you don't have the color spectrum you have nowadays. You've got a much more finite defined, you don't have like necessarily 18 different shades of red. You've got red.
Yeah.
Or you've got maybe orange, if you're lucky, but the hair colour of Marc Spector changes from actually the colour red to brown quite a lot randomly, which is fine, it's just part of the era. But you go, when you've got those colour limitations, and when you have Moon Knight, who's a character who dresses in white, and you have to use lighting to show the billowing of his cape and where he is, and the Scarlet issue when they're in the church, the lighting of the stained glass windows, you're like, the fact that basically just, I know it's got a colorist as well, so that obviously helped a lot, but the when the drawing of the shadows and the line work on it, I was just like, it's just, I love that style in the 80s. I do really like graphic novels and things that have got hyper detail and stuff. I do like that. But there's just something about that simplicity, just kind of before the next big jump in comic sort of designing.
Yes.
It's something about it. I just love it. The simplicity of it. And it's just so, it grabs me.
Oh, it's striking. I mean, it's just art. It is true art.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the other thing about this run. People obviously often talk about the, Bill Sinkovich's New Mutants run as being like, oh, that's like the kickoff of the real Bill Sinkovich, often. And, all Moon Knight fans are going like, nah, not really. Go back and check out, issue whatever of Moon Knight, and you'll see him fighting a werewolf in the rain, and it's all done, with everything is done with downlines.
Oh, yeah.
Everything's been done in this way that, it's fantastic. It's absolutely phenomenal, some of the art. So Bill Sinkovich also is like a defining piece of Moon Knight history. I think for me, when I look at when you go through the artists that have contributed to Moon Knight, and there were some fantastic ones, but he's always been able to accommodate artistic artists. Let me put it that way.
Yeah.
In the sense of, you obviously have like a House Marvel style. He's gone through that as well, in some cases, and it's fine. But when you have artists that go, like, I'm going to try something a bit different, it really works. I mean, he's the artist that can do that. I mean, again, I think I've said about my favourite versions of Moon Knight, and obviously Warren Ellis' 6-issue run, but Declan Shelvey's art on that again. Like Declan Shelvey doing this sort of and Geordie Belair as well. I've got to say, Geordie Belair is one of my favourite colorists. I think she's phenomenal.
100%.
But the artwork they did, where they were like, okay, well, we're going to have all this colour wash kind of look, but Moon Knight's just going to be white. We're not going to touch him. We're not going to give him shadow. In fact, we're not going to touch the paper at all. He's just white.
Yeah.
And it's striking and amazing.
Immediate. Pops out. Cuts through everything, doesn't he? With that Mr. Knight attire.
And that was the first appearance of Mr. Knight. Like Warren Ellis, he was in Secret Avengers, which is kind of fun. The sort of the end of one of the runs where sort of Captain America turns up and he's like, we want you to join the team. And he's like, really? Cool. And it's, sort of like, oh, Mark, calm down. So that 80s run is phenomenal. But this is the thing, they finished that, and it ends up, to show you the sort of the diversity that Moon Knight can accommodate. In that run, you've had sort of like international terrorists. You have a guy called, there's a sharpshooter whose arm is a gun, and he's got like a sight on his eye. It's ridiculous. But then he'll deal with like street level crime. He'll deal with
drug addiction.
Yeah.
That's like a deep cut. There's like a whole plot line about Gina's like eldest, isn't it? And that comes into it. And it's like, this is like deep social commentary that in the last 10 years has been shown in films and series a lot more. Maybe to The Wire, I think probably might have tackled actually that a bit earlier, but early 2000s. But this is like 2 decades before that. And I was reading this, I was like, if you showed this to someone today, like the Black Lives Matter movement, all that kind of stuff, and you think about all the stuff that a lot of that represents, and then you read this silly little Moon Knight comic where the premise is like some mercenary may have died, maybe got resurrected by an Egyptian god of the moon, and is now seeking out vengeance at night time. And you're like, what? Oh, by the way, there's like real deep social commentary and information about like drug addiction and gentrification of areas, and that gets explored more in further runs as well, including on the Ellis run. But you're just like, this where does this come from?
Yeah, 100%.
You like hit it. Oh my god, that's really deep. Next issue. Oh, I'm fighting like I'm fighting.
It's called Cabbie Killer. It's about a guy trying to kill people from a cab. It's literally ridiculous.
And you're just like, what? Where's this come from?
Yeah, it's very hit and miss. But you're right. There's a thing with that early run. I mean, even like the villains. We talked today about villains, sympathetic villains, right? And that's what this is loaded with. You know, like all of them are sort of there. Morpheus, the guy who can sort of uses his black Eben energy, his dream powers. What is he? Well, he's actually was experimented on, and it's so he had a dream. He's a Frankenstein, like he's a Frankenstein's monster. He's a creation. He's angry. He wants that vengeance. Like he's not evil. He's just lashing out. Carson Knowles, who becomes Black Spector, issue 25. The whole sort of first half of that book is him coming home from war, coming back from the Vietnam War, and being rejected by his family. He's lost his job. He can't get any more. He's then sort of told he's a baby killer. But there's a whole montage of him being told no, to the point at which he's completely broken and just says, screw it, then I shall take control back. If I can't take control in the normal way, then I shall take control in an exceptional way. And he sort of becomes Black Spectre. And starts to work through the political system, and you sort of like, so all of a sudden you've got this issue that's trying to deal with the fact that these Vietnam soldiers or soldiers from Vietnam coming back to this terrible treatment, and you're going like, he doesn't do good things, but that frustration and anger is kind of understandable,
Yeah, and also the whole arc about we'll get into the other run in a second as well, but like there's the whole arc about like, the rats where there's the police officer who then he goes goofy and he becomes like a giant rat kind of thing in a costume, but like the whole thing is about him seeing members of the police force being killed by non-white people and people he considers that are immigrants. And he's like, they aren't here legally, they're just committing crimes, and they're killing my police partners. He's experiencing severe PTSD from life on the police force, and witnessing his, police brothers being killed, while dealing with crime, which in itself is a whole PTSD-ridden thing anyway. And he's dealing with all that, while being fed stuff by certain news outlets about, immigration and all this sort of other things. And he's genuinely thinking he's doing a good thing. He's like, oh, Moon Knight's gonna be so. I think there's a line where he mentions Moon Knight and says when he sees what I'm doing, he'll understand. And it's like this is a really deep issue about mental illness, about immigration, about police, about PTSD. And you're like, this is like not even a full comic page, because obviously a comic issue, because a lot of these 80s issues, as you say, 2/3 of the story of it is a story, and then you've got a little end story, like a bonus thing, sometimes about Crawley, sometimes about other random things, sometimes just another Moon Knight story. And you're like, this is really deep. Then you turn the page and it's just, Marlene and Mark being goofy around artifacts. And I'm like, I really appreciate the run, but it is, you have to take it for what it is. There's so
100%.
much brilliance in it. And I'm really glad that because of this conversation in the essay book that I read the whole thing, and I did, because I did actually, to be honest, I did try just going, I was like, I remember most of the 80s run. I read a decent chunk of it. So I started reading the 2005 run, I think it is, the edgy run. And I read that, and I read the first issue or two, and I was like, this is brutal, face cutting off, all that jazz. I was like, this is nuts. Scott did tell me about this, but I was like, there's characters appearing that I loosely remember from reading the Moon Knight comic a couple of years ago. So I think it's Crowley, and then wasn't there a girl as well? And then he meets, the bit that made me resonate when he meets who was Frenchy, but it's Jean-Paul Duchamp. Yeah. And he's not got any legs, and I was like, who's this person? And then you get through it, and then Frenchy gets mentioned, the name, and I was like, oh, it's him. And I was like, I'm not going to enjoy this unless I go back, fully read all of Moon Knight, the 80s run again, and properly invest into it. And there was a couple of issues I was like, this is a bit hard going. And then whenever I'd think that the next issue would be an absolute banger. And so bleeding into the 2000s, 2005 run. So it was Charlie Huston, and with David Finch as the penciler. I know there are other pencilers involved as well in certain issues, but the complete change there, and that was the issue, the run that kind of, as you said, got you into Moon Knight. It's the first one. Yeah. So I turning onto this one, it is the complete opposite, almost, into the 80s run. I really enjoyed it for very different reasons, and I loved the art style for the opposite reasons. And I think the plot was really interesting, but instead of it being subtle, it was so over the top. It was actually, intentionally so, it was hard to follow because it was being so over the top with certain things and giving you so little like internal monologue that it completely, it's like Moon Knight, but you invert all the colours. And there's the through line is really the character and the origin story. And the 80s version of him was in theory canon in this, and it's full from grace. But it's so completely different, and it's hard to like them both. Do you know what I mean? I'm interested by your comparison.
All right, so this is the thing that's interesting. You're right, because they are so different. But, you know, we get this with all characters. Like, you know, you can't... it's hard to frame sort of like some of those early, you know, those 60s and 70s Batman with Frank Miller's Batman and, you know, even Scott Snyder's Batman later on. Like, you know, they are different. They are the same character, but they are different in many ways. And this is true, but one of the things is because Moon Knight isn't coming all the way from the 1930s, you know, it's from 75, and because he hasn't had a continuous run, his continuity is both harder and more easy to follow. But you can sort of follow a thread. So one of the things that you haven't read, and because you don't have access to it, is so after the 80s run, there's another one that was called Fist of Khonshu, which runs for 6 issues, which is very disposable, not very good. It's the one where it's sort of like, you know, it sort of lines up with his time in the West Coast Avengers. It's the, you know, he's got the gold bracelets and the big ankh on his front, and it's sort of, the costume is crap. Following that, Chuck Dixon brings him back to his roots, and we get Marc Spector Moon Knight, and that runs through that. At the end of that 60 run, which is 94, I want to say, it's about 1994, Marc Spector dies.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it, as far as Marvel are concerned, right? They were like, oh yeah, we might bring him back, we'll see. But he died in that thing, right? So he stayed dead for quite some time. He came back in 98, so he was 4 years dead, which is an eternity in comic terms. And they bring him back in 2 sort of mini runs written by Doug Moench. And they're escaping me now, but one's called High Strange or High Weird, something like that. And the other one's called something Wars. It's escaped me. But basically, Mark just wakes up.
Okay.
And he's like, oh, I'm alive. And that's what he's dealing with. He's like, oh, like, how have I brought back? Why was I brought back? Does this mean that Khonshu is real?
Just to check, sorry, the Marc Spector Moon Knight issue, how do they deal with Khonshu in that? Is it like the 80s?
Doesn't exist.
Oh, okay, right, that makes sense. So when he gets brought back to life again, it's not obvious
that's
it would
what's
be
so
Khonshu.
weird.
Right.
No, it's a complete sort of, so Khonshu exists in the sort of form of, there is a statue that appears in the sort of the Spectre Tower. It's not until the very end that you start to get sort of suggestions of paranormal, let's say, you know, the celestial with Seth and some of the bits and pieces. But yeah, he dies, he gets blown up, and then he is resurrected, and it's his 4-issue run where they're sort of like, oh, well, like, shit, like, you know, how's he been brought back? Stained Glass Scarlet visits him, and she's like, you know, this isn't normal, like, you know, this is to do with the occult, this is the paranormal. And he ends up bringing down like Carson Knowles again. But it's about him having to face up to the fact he's been resurrected, and it's a chance for redemption. But like, it's one of those things, it doesn't sort of leave on a good note. It's not happy families. Like, everyone's brought back together. And then they do this High Strange, which is sort of like a weird sort of, it's kind of linked to an earlier story with some CIA former operations. It's kind of throwaway. It's a little bit of fun, but it's Doug Moench doing the cabbie killer rather than the social commentary stuff. It's fine, but it's like, but being brought back, and then you don't get anything, you know, until he's in Marvel Knights. He appears in Marvel Knights, again written by Chuck Dixon, which is the early 2000s. And he appears briefly in that, and it's sort of dealt with. Some people are like, Daredevil in particular is a bit like, aren't you dead? And he was like, yeah, I don't know, you know, it's partially dealt with, but never is. So when you get to the Huston run, there's a gap, but there's sort of like, you know, the headcanon is he was resurrected and he was never able to deal with it. And so Bushman, because you see what happens, like Bushman starts just pushing him to his limits. So there is a story arc missing right, that we never get to see, that Bushman pushes him to his limits. And at the end of it, Mark's like, I can't face this anymore. I can't keep doing this. I've tried to be good. I've tried to have my redemption. I was resurrected and given this opportunity to be redemptive. I funded the group that was Marvel Knights for a part. I helped them out. But now Bushman has pushed me to this point, so I'm going to kill him and I'm going to cut his face off.
In the name of Khonshu.
In the name of Khonshu. And it's like that moment, to me, is like the end of an arc where you're like, imagine, when Bane turned up in Batman and pushes Batman to exhausts him and just mentally drains him and then attacks him at the end. Instead of Bane breaking Batman's back, this is Batman turning around and skinning off Bane's face. That's what it is. And, and he breaks his legs in the time. And like, people are like, he's gone off the deep end. And it's sort of like, and because he hasn't gained that redemption, people start to move away. Like, he pushes everybody away. And that's where the bottom starts. So that run is him trying to gain redemption, but like not. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like, he acknowledges, like, it's the first time that sort of, that resurrection. There's a character called, what's he called? He's like an interrogator. He wears the red sunglasses and he can sort of...
I never got his name, but he can see through anyone. He knows
He can read everyone, can't he?
Yeah.
He's one of those sort of like a Darren Brown kind of dude. Like, he can read everybody. And then at one point, he tries to read Moon Knight and he can't look at him. He's like, I can't, there's too much. Like, there's so much going on. I can't read... Like, it hurts him to look at Moon Knight. And I love that as a concept. Because it's like Sherlock Holmes, he's looking at everything going on, the crease on the trousers or the choice of the shirt or whatever is going on. He's reading stuff into it and he's super accurate, but he can't read Moon Knight. And the other character that sort of they end up sort of proving, it's all about being crazy. Like, it's this thing of being unpredictable and crazy. Like, Mark's given up trying to be crazy. This is the crazy years. Because even... what's the character called that can predict everybody's moves?
Taskmaster.
Taskmaster, thank you.
Yeah.
He can't beat Moon Knight.
No.
Because he's just like, I've no idea. Because he has no pattern. Like, he just does shit.
Yeah. He's like, I forgot your fighting stance down. And then Moon Knight just starts something crazy. And he's like, what are you doing? And, and it's like, I will say, I really, really enjoyed... because I read the first 2 volumes. I would have read more, but I knew I want to make sure I read enough Moon Knight to get a good idea and the essay book and all that jazz. So I will go back to that run. I really love the Midnight Suns bit, the connection with Civil War and his interactions with Cap and Tony Stark is hilarious. But I think I really...
Neither of them want them on their team.
He's like, they're like, I bet you're here to bring the Avengers. Like, no, I'm telling you to back the fuck off. Don't come near us. Yeah. You're going to cause all kinds of problems. And so do not, I'm telling you to back up. And it's like, oh, Jesus. But I really, really like them. They're bloody, they're brutal. I think if I'd have found this 10 years ago, I would be obsessed with Moon Knight almost like I am with Star Wars at the moment, because this was like really my bread and butter. And I really enjoyed it. There's so much cool stuff to like, but I found that if I hadn't read the 80s run, a lot of the impacts didn't hit as hard. So when I reread it after going back to the 80s run and reading it, I was like, oh, there's Crawley. Oh, I see why. And as you've just said, like, I hadn't thought about it. I thought it was because I'd missed the over some of the other runs that weren't as important to read in this kind of a bridge run through, or maybe it was a run from the missing parts I hadn't read. But I feel like, as you said, I think this run... It's because it's 5 collections, basically, 5 volumes. If it was 6, and it's the way it is now, the bottom was the second one, and Midnight Suns was the third, and there was one, even if it was only 4 issues or 5, it could be just the explanation of, like, Moon Knight is just by himself, a lot of dark colours, being like, how did I come back alive? How is this happening? And having like nightmares of heaven or hell and being like, where do I belong? Can I ever be at peace? And fighting things and seeing him beat the same thugs or the different thugs, but looking identical to him day in, day out for weeks and weeks. And like his hair, his facial hair growing and him being like, this is also pointless. Everything I'm doing is exactly the same. And there seems to be no end. And if I die, I get no peace. What do I do? And if that was there along with Bushman, pushing him and pushing him and pushing him, with Marlene being like, you need to get your stuff together, basically. Well, Marlene's not even in it by now, is she? Because
Marlene's left him. Marlene's left him.
But in the canon of Marc Spector, Moon Knight, and those other ones, is she just with him in the 80s run and basically
No, she's in Marc Spector Moon Knight. Like she's
okay,
about
right.
Yeah.
So with that, you could then show the Marlene leaving him a bit more, or her trying to save him a bit more, her leaving him going over the edge and all that stuff. And then it could be the culmination, the final issue of that run could be, as you say, the cutting off Bushman's face. Because I read this and I was like, who is this guy? And why is he cutting his face off? Even though you've told me it's Bushman. Because I hadn't connected the importance of Bushman. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that... And I had to Google it because I was like, before I decided to go back and read the 80s run again. And I was like, oh, okay, right. So he's doing that to the guy who kind of created him, sort of. And I was like, once I got to, I think, issue 2 or 3, well, after I'd, gone back and reread... everything makes so much more sense. When I'm in issue 2 or 3, I was like, oh, right. And then I actually, on the second read of this, when I tried again, when I got to issue 3 or 4, I was like, you know what, I'm going to go back to issue 1 again. And it makes so much sense. You're like, okay, right, so he's doing this, and Khonshu's messing with him in this way. But it's so much going on visually and like story-wise and personality-wise for Moon Knight as a character, and whether or not Khonshu is like who he's representing there or not, with all the intense gore, and you're like, this is so much to take in.
No, this is the thing. So I think one of the things we should highlight. You've just hit the nail on the head with something there about is or isn't Khonshu involved. So that the Huston run, there is a reintroduction of the potential of Khonshu, right? Let's call it the potential of Khonshu. The statue is there, and he pleads to Khonshu to be given another chance. And what steps out from the shadows is a faceless Bushman who becomes this sort of like wisecracking, antagonistic sort of entity. And you are never clear if that's a figment of Mark's imagination or if it is actually Khonshu, right? You never really know. But that is the first time. So when you look at the runs, it's sort of suggested there's a subtle suggestion in the Munch run. It's completely gone. The supernatural is pretty much all gone from Marc Spector Moon Knight, and then he dies, and then he's resurrected. All right. And in my head, this is my own personal Moon Knight headcanon, he was resurrected wrong. Right?
Oh.
He was brought back, but it's like, do you remember when you say about Buffy, right? So is it season 5, 6?
Spoiler alert. She dies and comes back, and then she's
spoiler alert for a show that's almost 25 years old.
Yeah, I know. But it was she dies, but and then comes back. But there's several episodes where she's struggling with why she was brought. Well, there's the first time she's brought back, she's kind of feral for a bit, like when she's first back, because she's like her brain like rotted. Basically, she was like actually dead. For actually quite a while. I think it's several weeks or several days at least. And
no,
then
it's weeks.
Yeah. Like, and it's the funeral and stuff. So yeah, I thought it was weeks. And then she comes back and she's like feral for like a day or two, and then she takes ages to readjust to what it is. Yeah,
there's a moment, and this is the thing with that. There's a moment in the Buffy the Vampire series where they keep sort of saying issue right, and she's going like she's playing it off, and she eventually confesses to someone like, "I was in heaven, and you pulled me out to this shit show. Thank you very much,
because you couldn't handle me being gone. You couldn't let me be peace.
You couldn't let me go, right?" So that was always played out in my head, this idea. And I kind of feel a little bit like that with Mark. Like Mark sacrificed himself. He had reached the epitome of what it is to be a superhero, the ultimate sacrifice. So he had made that sacrifice to save others. That's the sort of like the top of the mountain for superheroes. Okay. I know they've all done it and they all come back, but like that's that's the point though, isn't it? Right? The self-sacrifice. So he's brought back, and so for me, there's in the book I've got it in the introduction that there are phases, because there's no sort of thing of like a physical version of Khonshu until that Huston run, and then after that, like it's always been a bit unclear until recently. So to me, there's a whole period. Like I've actually got them. I call them phases because that's Marvel for you. So I'll just quickly. I've got phase 1, 1975 to 1980. I've got finding his feet, so how they want to use him, what they want to do with him. Phase 2, 1980 to 1994. She's right. She's the Cape Crusader, and that is the 80s run, Fist of Khonshu, and then Marc Spector Moon Knight, in which he is sort of like he's a superhero. He is a non-powered superhero for the most part. So he is just he's a Batman or he's a Daredevil. Or he doesn't have. He's not Superman, right? He's just a guy putting himself in harm's way to help others. That's the point. 1998 to 2012, I've called it the resurrection trauma phase because that's what it is. Throughout this year, he goes up and down. He tries to be different things. So you have like the Huston run where he goes brutal. And you've talked about the first two volumes. You haven't read some of the best bits. So there's actually one called America's. What's it called? God and Country is volume 3. Read it. All right. I'm going to keep recommending. Just read all of them.
I do intend to.
Spoilers. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to give you just
do it. I'm fine for it.
Carson Knowles comes back as Black Spectre, but also there's an issue following Civil War. So Civil War's been resolved. Iron Man has won. Cap's been arrested, and there's this issue where they start. There's Iron Man is now doing the Superhero Registration Act, and so each superhero has to be assessed.
Oh, that's in volume 2.
Is it in volume 2?
Yeah, and he goes in there because he talks to the guy who can read everyone, and he gets the guy to read everyone to read the interviewer guy. Yes. And figure out, and that's how he pretends to be insane, the kind of thing. He basically
scares the crap out of the guy.
Yep.
And basically gets registered as a superhero, and everyone's like, "Really, Moon Knight?" And the guy's like, "Yeah." But he's intimidating him into doing it, and I think it's so good. But beyond that, there's all this stuff, and God and Country is about this again. The Carson Knowles comes back, and everyone loves him. Like he's running to be mayor, and he's like, I've been in prison, I've had my redemption story, I want to do good for the country. And Mark's going, has everybody lost their minds? Like this guy tried to kill hundreds of people before, and he finds out it's true. He's doing it again, but it ends with him kicking. Spoilers.
Do it. It's fine. No, you can spoil it for me. It's okay. Yeah. I know loosely a lot of this Moon Knight stuff anyway from our numerous conversations, so I'm well.
He kicks Black Spectre off the top of a building. And everyone's like, Iron Man's like, well, that's it. You've kind of blown your chance now. So he ends up going on the run. He uses the name Jake Lockley and goes down south. There's all that other by the end of that 5-volume run, it ends with him saying, well, I've got to go back. And then it wasn't followed up. And you're like, hang on. But he's gone through all this trauma. Like he's still the down south stuff is great. They deal with like a Mexican deity, like death entity, brilliant. Anyway, but what you then get is the follow-up is The Vengeance of the Moon Knight, which is a 10-issue run, and it starts with him in daylight. Like he's got like a motorcycle now. He's got he doesn't use guns. He's got like these discs. It fires discs. He's looking to be the superhero, like an actual. He's looking for redemption, and the whole issue is about him trying to be good. And the villain of the piece ends up bringing back, sort of like resurrecting Bushman to face up to him and all this other stuff, right? But he ends up being good. He has like an appearance of Deadpool in it and some of the pieces. But because of his actions in that, he ends up joining the Secret Avengers. Cap comes and finds him and makes him join the Secret Avengers. But even Cap's like, you're still crazy. I don't trust you, but I know you're good at what you do. And so that whole period is him doing it, and then he joins the Secret Avengers. Doesn't go as well as he'd hoped. It's some really good stuff. You get Ed Brubaker written it, but it ends with Warren Ellis writing a short run, which is really good. And it's the first time you get Mr. Knight sort of design.
Love it.
Yeah. But like because of that, and it not going really well and stuff, he ends up sort of doing a runner. And just leaves New York. It's too much for him, all this stuff. So he moves to LA and uses the name Stephen Grant and becomes a producer and starts trying to make a Moon Knight movie. But you still know he's crazy. And this is the first time they really introduce alternate personalities, because it's written by Brian Michael Bendis, who can fuck off as far as I'm concerned.
He's very I've not read, I don't think, any Bendis stuff, but I know that everything he touches is a lot of the time it's the Marmite, because he always turns characters on their heads. And I know there's 2 or 3 ones that people go, these ones are amazing. But I know the majority of stuff he touches, people are like, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah,
is the main thing I hear about Michael Bendis.
When he's off to do his own thing, Ultimate Spider-Man is phenomenal. It's probably one of the best runs, consistently good runs of anything ever, of comic book fun. Like, it's amazing. And he has done a couple of other things. When he did Avengers, it was pretty good. But with Moon Knight, like, it was just like it lasted 12 issues, didn't do well, but it's set in LA. But he has this thing where the whole first issue is him, and he ends up talking to like Cap, Captain America, Wolverine, and Spider-Man. And then you find out that they're not there, and he's broken, and he's emulating their powers and stuff. But he meets people like Echo and some other characters as well. And he takes on this sort of Count Nefarious from that, this sort of like Avengers level, and an Ultron. He takes on an Ultron. So it's like it gets out of hand.
And he has their pack, because I've got a question about. I was like, I've literally got a question, which is, ask about the Spider-Man, Wolverine, Captain run, and other stuff between the 80s and 2000s. So like,
this is him still dealing with his trauma. This is still
he has the powers.
No.
He thinks he does.
Yeah. So he basically, and the reason I've got it, because I've got it in actually a really nice oversized hardback. So he doesn't, but he uses technology to emulate their powers.
Right.
So he has like a laser, when they sort of like, do you remember when Cap had that sort of like the light shield that would come out of it? So he has that.
Right.
And he has the webs of Spider-Man.
Mm-hmm.
And he has like gauntlets that have claws that come out the back of them. And so he has this moment. So there's a moment in it, and again, spoilers, where basically a character gets hurt, and he's trying to be restrained. He keeps saying, I can't do this, kind of that. And the Wolverine character's going like, fuck him up. And eventually because the Cap character's like, it's a bit like the id, the ego, and the superego. Like there's these, or the angel and the devil on his shoulder. Cap saying like, you're a superhero. What do you think I'm going to think of this if you do this or whatever? But eventually someone gets hurt and he just loses it. And he's like, the claws spin out and he becomes Wolverine. Anyway, eventually sort of like he has to confront this, and someone says to him like, you can't sort of keep doing this because you're not Captain America, Wolverine, and Spider-Man. You're just a guy in a suit. And so he sort of gets this mission done, but at quite a heavy expense. And then again, sort of says, much like with Down South, he realizes, I've got to go back. Like, there's not much I can do here. He's got to go back. So he decides to go back to New York. The other thing I would say is, again, talking about art, the greatest thing about this is Alex Maleev's art. Alex Maleev is a phenomenal artist, and some of the panels in that are absolutely beautiful. I'd have them as wall art. But that sort of takes us to the Ellis run. And so there's this period, I think, so all that stuff from the Resurrection, I think it's called Resurrection Wars, actually. I've just realised it's called Moon Knight Resurrection Wars.
Oh, okay.
From 1998. And so that period through to the Bendis run is him trying to process that I've been brought back from the dead. And I don't know why I'm here. Everything I do seems to go wrong. I'm a bit of a mess. And it's because he keeps having people around him. So he reached he had people around him, and he sort of hit the rock bottom. When he tries to bring himself back, he tries to sort of reconnect with Marlene and Frenchie and other people. It keeps going wrong. He does it in the Bendis run as well. Like he introduces people, tries to build a group around him again, and it goes wrong. So he realizes the only way for him to deal with this is to be just like, I'm on my own. It's just me. So he sort of he kind of bins off a lot of his fortune into sort of technology and stuff. Almost drops everything else. Like there is no Jake, there is no Stephen, there is no Mark.
No, I was going to say in that run, because I read that run, it's the 6 issues, isn't it? It's just the 6. And they're all individual stories that very much, and there's an essay about it as well, which very much harken back. Well, I think it's your essay, is it? Your essay. I was going to say, wait a minute. Yes, number 9th one, isn't it? The penultimate essay in the book. And I was like, I was reading this, I was like, I could tell Scott very much enjoys this run. And it made me like the run more, and it pointed out certain things through it. I was like, when I read that, I was like, I think the art style is, I've written visually amazing, and I've written each episode has its own kind of personality. I think the panel work mixed with the artwork in this Ellis run is some of the best paneling I've ever seen in comics, because I think you mentioned it in your essay actually, but it's like it's Sniper, I think, when it's got there's a group of people and it's like 8 people and one person gets killed and every page turn like a panel where their word disappears.
Yeah.
And then you've got that's just amazing. And the box, which is about death, and it's all about like it's like psychedelics mixed with astral projection, mixed with like dream science, mixed with DMT, and you're like, what is this? And the visuals, you're like, this looks like incredible. Like if you printed up any of those, if you took Moon Knight out of those images and you printed them, put them on a giant wall in some sort of Amsterdam coffee house or like Woodstock or something, like you would get thousands of people wanting to buy it and put it in their house, being like the mycelium networks of the world. You're like, this is it. And I'm like, every thing has got its own personality. And one of the bits I loved, which again, all the notes I made the notes first, then I read the essay book, and I was like, all the notes I've made here, Scott, unsurprisingly, has made in much more cohesive way. But one of them I said is, it's kind of claimed that his personalities reflect the 4 aspects of Khonshu. And I was like, that's a really interesting way of going about it. And I think that this Ellis run, although not dissimilar, I think, to the Huston run, this run, it works so amazing if you've read prior Moon Knight. But I think of all the Moon Knight comics, this one, maybe the Lemire one because it's so different, but this or the 2, Lemire or Ellis runs, one of those 2 I think would work quite well to start with. I think Lemire maybe because the multiple personalities might be too much if you don't really know what's going on. But because of the simplicity of this run, where, you know, his family, his kind of found family that was primarily in the 80s is loosely mentioned. I think in issue 2 he actually does kind of try to reach out to some of them, but like they're never really a major part unless I'm sorry, I was trying to think of something else. I was thinking of Marlene, but that's in the Huston run. But I just think it took me aback a bit when I read the run, because there's only 6 and where all the other runs are quite long and they're quite in depth. I was like, this is like really, really simplistic in the storytelling. I think that the stories that are being told are probably the weakest, because there's not necessarily an overarching story, but the subtext and the stuff I loved about the 80s run is probably the best it's ever been, where it's just so much of it. And you're the expert on this.
Well, that's what I say. That's one of the reasons I like this, is because the thing is, this is a bit like taking Doug Moench's work and taking out all the cabbie killers and just focusing on Hit It. This is what this is to me.
Yeah.
And there's just so much good stuff in there. So you say about the personalities, like you don't meet them, you do see them. And what I love is, like, this is about Mark. This is Mark being Mr. Knight or Moon Knight. Like that's it. And in the first issue, the end of the first issue, after he's faced off with, I compared it to Slasher, which is issue 2 of the original run. He's gone against this sort of ex-SHIELD agent who's been sort of building his body up using sort of like gym people that be going to the gym and
body horror proper.
It's proper body horror. But I love the fact that, he's, as I sort of say, he's covered in like red, white, and blue. He's drenched. It's not blood, but he's drenched in the colours of the American flag, and this is what it's been made of. And then you got Mark and as Mr. Knight, who's just this stark white thing. But it's brutal. Like one of the main things that the differences between, as we've said, like throughout the Caped Crusader era and that trauma era, was Mark looking for a family. Like he had a found family, and now he was looking to replace it for a while, and now he's not. And the whole thing with that Slasher issue is he tries to help Crowley's son. He's like, he's trying to help Crowley. In this one, he just kills the guy. And he's just like, yeah, you're a liability. There's nothing we can do. You've got to be taken down. So he just kills him. But when he gets sort of home, he goes back to sort of Grant Mansion. He's in stark white and he's confronted by Khonshu. This is the first time we get the bird skull headed Khonshu. Yeah, it's an amazing design. But also, you see Stephen Grant and Jake Lockley stood, and they're just grey. They're there.
It's the chair, isn't it? It's the chair by the fire, and I love that.
Yeah, they're there, but they are. He's focused. He's almost trying to ignore them, and he knows he can't do anything. And it's the same thing. The whole run has got social commentary running throughout it. Like, Sniper is about a military contractor left for dead. The one with the ghosts, box.
That was I would say the one with the one with the ghosts was probably my least favorite one. When I read your interpretations of it and the subtext, I was like, okay, that makes a lot of sense, and a lot of the dual meanings and the connection to the whole Lenny storyline that we spoke about in the 80s run. I was like, actually, now that you've said that, because I did wonder what's the music box got to do with it. And then when you made that connection, I was like, oh. And I think it would have maybe been better if it was Lenny's music
Actually,
box or
Lenny,
something.
I
think that would have worked a lot better, and I would have been like, oh shit, that. But my issue with that one was it felt like a weird non-start, because it was like, oh, there's ghosts. Oh, is this going to be supernatural? And I know we've already had like body horror, weird sciencey stuff. Okay. Oh, there's ghost in this one. Oh, and Khonshu's back a lot more, and he uses like the artifacts of Khonshu. Oh, this is him kind of reconnecting with Khonshu a little bit, because at the start he was a bit distant. And then he beats the ghosts. That's the end of it in the next issue. And you're like, okay. And then it's never brought up again. And you're like, so the artifacts, you've just put them back in the box that you had. You're not wearing the garb anymore, so if you come across ghosts, you're going to get the shit kicked out of you again, and so you're going to have to go get the artifacts. I was like, I thought this was like the next gen costume change or something, and then it was just just a one-off.
The fact is, well, it is, but it is and it isn't. I mean, one of the things about this issue is, this run, is every issue is something else. Yeah, and they all lead up to issue 6. So the first 5 all lead up to issue 6, really. In a way, they're a very loose sort of storytelling. But it's the fact of how adaptable. This is the point of this is Moon Knight, or Mark, is now on his own. Yeah, and it makes him much more adaptable. That's the point. I mean, you're right. I mean, the sleep issue is a phenomenally looking issue. It has him sort of going into this sort of you said this sort of like, DMT sleep dream world. Well, the research I was doing for that, I'm reading about DMT trips and all this other stuff, and I'm like, Jesus Christ! I'm
very intrigued by that. Like the idea of ego death, and like people who seem atheists feel like they talk with God, and other people believe it's like experiences of other dimensions, and because it's made in like your own brain and the pineal gland and all that stuff. And I'm like, it's very interesting in concept, quite scary. But I was like, I've been through rabbit holes and watched documentaries on that kind of stuff. It's nuts. Yeah, and it is, but it's a phenomenally cool issue. And then it's followed up by Scarlet, which is basically the raid. I loved that. I was like, this issue adds almost nothing to the plot, but just shows that Moon Knight could just kick the shit out of everyone. And I was like, this feels like the raid. So I was just like, in all the best ways. Yeah, and it has 2 of my favourite panels in this. It's one of the favorite ones. It's just him, like there's a guy like Prince basically comes out with a couple of gold knives, and Marc Spector's response is nice. He's like, full respect. But then when he gets to the end, the young girl who's been kidnapped, she's sort of like, she gets it. She's like, oh no, don't take your mask off, you don't need to come for me, your mask is your face. Like, I get it. I loved that bit. Yeah, and he's like, smart kid, like, it. So, and then you get to the end and you see that there's this guy called Ryan, who, much like Carson Knowles, came back from war and was rejected. And you had that montage. You get the sort of montage of his life of being told, like, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done this? You've never always let us down. You've never achieved. And he sees Moon Knight running around, and so he becomes the new Black Spectre. And he tries to take him on. He wants to take Mark's place. But it ends in possibly one of like the last. Because obviously there were 2 more writers. There were 2 sort of like it went to 17 issues, the actual whole overall run. But this ends with they confront, and Mark sort of stood there as Mr. Knight, and he sort of he says he talks about Carson Knowles just wanting to be loved. That's what he wanted to be. Like, he'd been rejected, and he just wanted the city to love him, and that was why he failed. But that's why he failed. He says, let me tell you about me. People who love me suffer and die. I never want to be loved. That's why I win. And this is like the statement. That's the end of the trauma era. He's like, I'm done with all that. I get who I'm damaged. I'm dangerous. I need to be alone. And I can do my things on my own. And you get that sort of, and again, that's the sort of the end point of that trauma era. And then it runs up to today, and you sort of get you're able to have like Lemire then address all this, where he's like, yeah, you're right, you have turned inwards and you've turned into it, but let's really now give you a sort of some therapy, and you're going to address this, and we're going to pull all this to bed. Well, I do want to get into the Lemire run, but I do want to ask as well, with the run that Ellis started that didn't continue. So I only read the 6 issues of Ellis. I didn't read the other 2 because, again, trying to do an abridged overall read. Are they good? Are they worth it? Like, why did Ellis? I'm surprised that he signed them for only basically a limited series that then continued. It seemed a bit. I was surprised by that.
Well, it was part of the Marvel Now thing, and I think Marvel were looking to. They wanted more.
Yeah.
But I mean, the Ellis run is the best bit. I mean, he only did 6 issues of Secret Avengers.
Okay.
So he was sort of going through this phase, I think, of doing that kind of thing and other things, which we don't talk about because, he's not a good person.
Yeah.
But the other ones, the follow-ups are quite good. I mean, one of the things, the second volume introduced me to Greg Smallwood, who does the Lemire run, who is, again, a phenomenally good artist. They're okay. The second one, the second batch, let's say, volume 2, it's called Dead Will Rise, is about a young woman who's a doctor sort of looking to use the power of Khonshu to take revenge. And so she ends up sort of like manipulating Mark into a position where she can take on the powers of Khonshu. And it's fine, like it works and it looks great, but it is what it is. The third issue, the Colin Bunn's run, is a bit like, is very sort of is back to like the Cabbie Killer.
I was going to say, is it silly? Because I know Cullen Bunn from his Deadpool stuff. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe, that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
I read all those because I got it bought for me, and it's pretty cool. But it's cool if you're in the mood for Deadpool, which is silly, over the top gore with a smart cracking thing and things going really meta and strange. They're cool for that. But it's not like you read Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe and you go, that run changed me. That run changed my perspective on. You go, no, it was junk food comics. So I don't know. When I see Colin Bunn, I'm go, that sounds like the run would probably be a fun, Spider-Man Deadpool-esque wander. But I don't necessarily want skin deep goofiness in my comics. So
the thing is, Volume 2, written by Brian Wood, is a 6-issue story. Okay. Right, and it works as such, and it's kind of good. It doesn't impact on the wider continuity. It's just a story that exists within Moon Knight's life, right? But it works because of what Ellis done. So the reason the Wood story is able to take place is because of the position Ellis put him in. This idea of being a loner and that sort of thing. What Colin Bunn did, he read the Ellis run and went, "I can do that," and everyone reads it and says, "No, you can't." No, I'm afraid you can't. And so it doesn't work. It's not terrible by any stretch, but it's like when you're putting in comparison and when, if you're going to go, "Oh, I'm going to do 6 standalone issues as well." And then you're going, but you're following up the Warren Ellis run, which has been, almost era defining. You got to bring your A game. And unfortunately it doesn't kind of work. There's a couple of issues that are kind of fun, but they feel like, when you watch Doctor Who.
Yeah. And
you'll go like, that's a phenomenal issue. It's the same thing. You go, oh man, there's some amazing episodes. And then the next one you go, oh, it's trying to be that episode, but it's not, it's kind of not working. It's
not got the build up. It's not got the message. You've just gone, what's cool about that thing? We'll take those bits out of it and put it in this. It's like, that's not what was good about it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, is it Blink, the first time you introduced?
Oh, love it.
You watch Blink and you go, oh man, that's a phenomenal episode. That's an incredibly good episode. And then they go, oh yeah, now I'm going to use the Angels, Weeping Angels in another way. And you go, because they're really cool and we can do something similar. And you watch it and you go, oh.
Yeah. I will say, Doctor Who, there's quite funny, there's a degree of comparison with Moon Knight in a lot of ways, because Doctor Who has some of the best moments, I think, in TV history. And I've not watched a lot of the older Doctor Who. I've seen quite a few, John Pertwee and Tom Baker, etc. But with Doctor Who, I watched all of Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, I haven't seen since then. I've not watched Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi, Jodie Whittaker, or any of the new stuff. Even the new the David Tennant recent stuff, which I've heard is good. But with me and Megan keep wanting to go back and watch, from Christopher Eccleston to all the way up to date, because we so much love David Tennant and we've heard good things about some of the other Doctors. But it's one of those things where I watched it religiously when it came out, because it came out just as the prequel trilogy ended. So I was like, I'm done with Star Wars. Doctor Who's my new obsession for several years. And I loved it. And when I think of some of the David Tennant and Eccleston episodes, I'm like, some of this is just so well written and so well thought out and so well put to screen. You're like, some of the stories in this, phenomenal. And then next episode is just like a giant farting marshmallow thing. And you're like, where? And it's because they've got no budget left. They had these, it feels like every Doctor Who season they've got 13 episodes for some reason every time. And then let's do it where we've got 6 incredibly thought out 2-parters, 2 really good one-off, really interesting sci-fi ideas, almost like Red Dwarf, where it's like, let's just do something really weird and different and cool. And then you've got 3-ish episodes left. You're like, I don't really know what to do with this. Let's do a kids competition, let the Absorbaloff in and be the worst episode ever. Let's do all the... And you're like, where's the budget gone? Where's the thinking gone? It feels like they did it all and they had one afternoon to write 3 episodes. And I found... I wonder if with Moon Knight, it's not quite the same thing, but there just seems to be, for so much of the amazing, great Moon Knight moments, you've then just got this other stuff that misses the mark. And it kind of adds to the legacy of Moon Knight in some ways, but it also kind of, unless you're like me or like you, which is I think like Jack of Jack's Musings, where I like completing stuff. I like starting things. I like collecting Star Wars books and comics. High Republic is my obsession with Star Wars. I want to read everything High Republic because it's my little fixation. And Moon Knight, I can really see where there's bits of it. I'm like, I just want to, because there's enough. You try and read all of Spider-Man, you have to commit your entire life now with over 1,000 issues of the Amazing Spider-Man run, not even including anything else he's ever done. There's over 1,000. I think it's over 1,200 now, or something nuts. And so you're like, if you want to read all of Spider-Man, goodbye anything else you want to do. But Moon Knight is enough where you can commit, and in a few years you can really get it. But there's so much variation. And I think the Lemire run, I really want your opinion on, because I know that's Tony's favourite run, and I know that, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. However, although I think I enjoyed it the most out of all the runs that I read, I think it's tainted because of the Disney Plus series is so close to it, because it's the adaptation.
Kind of.
In a lot of the themes in it.
Yeah, the themes in it and the introduction. I think you're right. And I think, to me, the Lemire run is... I mean, again, Jeff Lemire is one of those writers that, and I've read bits and pieces of Lemire over the years, that I find starts well, and anything beyond issue 20 of anything he does starts to sort of fall apart a little bit, or I lose interest. So this was a really good, 16 issues, and it works really well. But one of the things is, it's one of those. If you ignore the sort of the wood and the bun stuff, right? You have the Ellis run. And then you get the Lemire run, and then you get the Bemis run. But if you even ignore the Bemis run potentially, and you go straight to the Mackay run, the Jed Mackay run, they act as like a 3 acts, really, where you have that 6-issue run is Mark just standing alone and going, I know what I am, and I'm dealing with shit. Like, this is me. I'm going to just be. This is who I am. And then Lemire says, well, let's face into all that trauma. Let's face into it all. Like, you're doing you are now stood alone, but you've got like decades of people dying, of identity disorder and resurrections, and just your inability to deal with whatever trauma it is you've had. Let's face into that. Absolutely, just face into that. Did you die? That's the big question. Like, did you die? Do you have some sort of dissociative identity disorder? Is the start of your trauma the resurrection? Is that your trauma? And the answer is, let's start talking about it. No, it's not. And that's what Lemire does. He sort of takes you back to the beginning, and all of a sudden you're like, this wasn't a guy that was just a mercenary that was resurrected. He was chosen. Like, we're going to tell you now that everything is wrong, kind of thing. We're actually going to go back to the beginning and tell you that as he entered puberty, he suffered a trauma. Something happened, and even Lemire run doesn't tell you what it is. Something happened, and his dad knows about it. And his dad may have even be suffering from some sort of illness or trauma himself, and they're not facing up to it. This family does not face up to it. His dad's a rabbi and is all about facing and supporting others, but not his family, right? And that's the sort of the tragedy of the Spector family. And so you realize that Mark running away from his religious roots, going off and joining the army, becoming a boxer, then becoming a mercenary and a CIA operative, is all about him trying to just not face up to the shit, whatever the hell happened to him as a kid, and how his childhood panned out. And so you have this book where you're going like, oh my God, like, I'm reading like a superhero comic, which has got me traveling through the outer world, or the other world as they have it. It's got, Egyptian deities riding the backs of scarab beetles and shit. Like, this is crazy. Like, New York's full of sand. But what we're actually dealing with is the fact that this guy's been dealing with trauma and just been piling on it for years. And that's what we're having to deal with. And so it makes me emotional. That book gets me really emotional because like, this is a character I love, but also you just sort of like the way it's written is really well. Because then you sort of see that him joining the army and he fucks up. Like, he speaks to Stephen Grant is the first personality that came along. So Stephen's the first one, which is obviously, as you say, is mirrored in the TV show. And it goes through in the army and all sort of stuff. And eventually sort of it culminates in them for the first time ever. They speak. And so there's a wonderful part in the book. I'm going to grab it in a sec. There's a wonderful part in the book because the story is broken into sort of, the first one is like told as a mystery. Right? He wakes up in an asylum. And again, Greg Smallwood does a phenomenal job in this. This book actually contains some of my favorite artists of all time. And so I was so happy when this book starts coming out. I'm just like, this is amazing.
And I assume you're going to talk about the 3-pronged artist issue.
Exactly that.
4-pronged. That issue, I know Tony mentions it in his essay. So his essay is all about this Lemire run. And I will say the artwork when I was reading this and the imagery is so good. Both, like, again, I know I keep saying subtext in this conversation, but it's like, this, I think, has such a balance. I think the Ellis run did as well, which I think the OG run was too subtle in certain ways with art and a lot of other things. And then I think the Huston run was no subtlety. It was gore and over the topness. It was almost like a grindhouse movie of just any emotion is felt 150 to 200% in the whole run. Every single thing is the most extreme version of itself, which is fine in the confines of the story, but it can be a bit much. And I find that the kind of eras that I was thinking of New Moon Not in, I think because of reading, the introduction that you did in the essay book, and it kind of, in my mind, it's split into those eras as well. I think that the kind of the rebirth era, the post-Resurrection Wars era, this whole Lemire, Ellis, sort of onwards run, the runs rather, I just think that they are the ones I've read at least are really getting to grips with the core of what makes Moon Knight, but different perspectives of how it works and the visual elements of it. And this issue that I'm going to let you speak about now is just incredible, like a masterclass in comics. This is like
it is
one of those things of like what the potential you can do with a comic.
This is one of them. I'm so glad you've said that because that's my position on this. I think really this isn't just a good Moon Knight book. This is a fantastic comic. It's like you said, it shows you what the medium can do. Like it sets you off confused. It addresses everything, like from the original run all the way through. Is he mad? Is he doesn't confront people. Like he's impotent and he sort of gets kicked about until he gets on his Moon Knight costume, which is a towel wrapped around his head and a sheet. It looks ace. But you thought, oh, he's crazy, like he's in this thing, and then you realize, you get this story of him being, in the other world or the outer world, what it's called now, and there's this sort of journey of sort of like, with the people that he's lost. Gina's there, Crowley's there, her family, and it's all about this thing of Egypt taking over. It's all in his. I mean, all this is in his head. Like it doesn't actually happen, and he gets to have closure with all these people that he's lost or has wronged in the past. I mean, it's therapy for him. He's going through, and Gina gets to go home to her diner. Marlene sort of gets to to leave him in the best possible way.
And Crawley's kind of the anchor, oddly enough, in that part, because the story is an odd one because it's 14 issues and it is one continuous story, but it's kind of in its acts in a way. But it's with Crawley, I find he's not in every issue, but I think Crawley has such a large impact in this, and I think that this run and the original run especially, I think they have Crawley is such an interesting character, and I'm like, I don't want a Crawley comic because I think I would lose the point, but I love how he's this homeless man. We know very little about him. He's always got flies around him. He carries around the one tea bag that cracks me up. I love that, and he just always asks for hot water wherever he goes because he wants to dip his one tea bag but he speaks so eloquently and he knows these words, and a lot of the time Gina's like, can you just speak English, please? What the hell are you saying? And even when you're reading it, you're like, I don't know what the hell he's saying. And then Jake Lockley would go, Crawley, what are you saying? And you're like, oh, thank God, because I'm like, if that's the main plot point, I don't know what the hell he's going on about.
I've missed the point.
And in this, he's like an anchor point. He's the person telling Mark what the truth is, which is quite interesting. I really liked that.
But he always has been. That's the point. He always has been, and that's he gets to realize that, and then it's sort of like, you know, and one of the things is of all the people, Gina gets back to her gets to go back to her diner and stuff like that. Crowley doesn't. Crowley just has to go off into the ether with these Egyptian things. Like, he almost gets sacrificed to go off with them. But he's always done that. Like, he has no home. He has no anchor point. He is an anchor for Jake, but he's not got his own.
He's a nomad. And he's also, in the Huston run, he's the catalyst in the first issue that brings Marc Spector out. Whether or not it's heavily indicated that it might have been Khonshu or something in his own mind, and Crowley didn't show up, or maybe he did, and it's that whole weird.
I like to think he did. I like to think he did. Him.
Yeah, but like whether or not it was actually Crowley there, it's just that how important he is to Mark. Whether or not Mark ever admits it, that in two completely separate runs, Crowley is so essential to the saving of Mark's mind. Which is quite interesting from a character who, from looking at Crowley, knowing he's a homeless man and carries on one teabag and all this stuff, you'd think he's the most unhinged person. But when he speaks so eloquently, and he always tells Mark the truth, and he's always this through line whenever he's used of being almost like, it's almost like he's the real deity. I'm only just thinking that. It's almost like that's the one thing I would have said now thinking about it that I think was missing from the essay book. If I was writing an essay, that ship has sailed now, but I would write one on Crowley being, what if Crowley is actually the deity protecting Mark? And Khonshu is the way that Crowley is like using...
trying to corrupt him.
Yeah, and it's like Khonshu and Crowley are actually fighting over, but Crowley's almost like a beyond, like a real, not just a god in the Marvel universe like Thor, like actually a deity above and beyond that kind of confines. I would love that idea, and it's a nice idea. It cool.
Works. You're right. I mean, he is such a great character, and like, you know, but one of the things you get with this issue, I think, you know, we want to get to the issue we want to talk about, is that one sort of things go wrong. You know, he's dressed as Mr. Knight, and then he's confronted by his own version of himself, like his original version, the Munch Sinkovich version. And there's a fight, and that's when it's sort of like he's starting to having to confront things. So all of a sudden, like he's confronted all the people and dealt with that. Now he's having to confront himself. That's been stripped away. All that's left is himself. And all of a sudden, he keeps trying to avoid it. And so you get the issues stumble forward with him going through his different personalities. And you see that, like, you know, Mark gets shot off into space. Like, he becomes this, like, you know, space adventurer kind of thing, fighting off werewolves, which is awesome, on the moon. You have Jake Lockley being drawn and painted by Francisco Francavilla, whose art is sublime.
He's done quite a few Star Warsy things, actually. A lot of the Tales from Vader's Castle, like the horror anthology stories stuff. Very, very cool. Very well done.
He's such a good artist. Like, his noir style is so fun. It's so good. But then you find that, like, Steve Grant is making a film, much like he was in the Bendis run. And that's his happiest. He's a producer. He's with Marlene. All's good. And that's his escape. But it all starts coming together. It all starts falling apart. And we're flicking between each of these personalities until they start to collide and they start to bleed into each other. Eventually, they all have to run through a door, and they are confronted by, at the end of issue 8, our Mark, dressed as Mr. Knight, but without his mask on, and it's so they all run through, and it's something again that they all run through, and he just says, "Hey fellas, thanks for coming. We need to talk."
Yep.
And he's like, "We've now got to talk. Like, this is it." And they have to start. And he starts. This is again the first moment. But I remember reading this issue. Right, it's issue 9. And again, a great cover. The cover is sort of, again, Smallwood. It's a sort of Mark looking at like this sand dune, and the sand dune makes up the faces of the different personalities. And it's just great when he says, "I'm sorry, but none of you are real. I wasn't sure either, not for a while, but now I know I am." So he's centering himself. And he just starts to sort of like talk to them. And then the first one to go is the newer one. He's like, "I haven't got a clue what you are. Like, I don't know."
Yeah, the space one. Crazy one. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, "I don't even know what you are. Like, you've come from nowhere." And so he goes, and then he starts to confront them, and he either has to fight them off which is Jake as the violent version of Moon Knight, or the original version of Moon Knight. He's like, I'm sorry, and then Stephen is just them talking, and they hug, and it's just like, he accepts it, and he's like, yeah, we have to heal. Like Matt Stephen's like, we have to heal. This is the only way I accept this. And this is that thing I said about Stephen Grant is a hero, because it's the self-sacrifice again. He's like, I know I can't exist in this world if we need to be healthy. But what's interesting is, and this is again one of the things, if you're supposed to read Lena's her essay in particular, takes it from a personal standpoint of how you are treated as a patient, and how you sort of have to acknowledge these different identities or these different alters, and how you deal with them. But once he's sort of addressed them, and they've sort of combined, he's able to face his original trauma, because the next story is literally him facing into his original trauma. Like, we go back to his childhood, we see that the original appearance of Stephen, the fact that he's actually the first time he's introduced to Khonshu as a child, and all this other stuff, and it builds up, and you see more and more, and it's him then going back into the overvoid, that's what it's called. So I've just the overvoid, and starts to confront these, all this Egyptian mythology and all this other stuff. But what it is as he's going through, it's still running through his life, him as a boxer, him as a soldier. And then finally, like you say, it comes to, he's able to go through all this, everything he goes through, this reconciliation, and it comes to the final reconciliation. And this is the bit where it's really important, is I killed people for Bushman. Like, all this stuff I've talked about, all this trauma that's been piled on, it all culminated in me being a bit of a knob. Like, I was not a good person. And I sort of, lied, and I did this stuff. And eventually, so I say, the final issue is it has some superheroics, has him fighting people and this other stuff. And it comes down to, like, the werewolf comes back, and Khonshu comes back, and Bushman comes back. But the final moment is, and it's a great panel, it's used in the essay book by, I think, Lena. It's where he accepts it. Khonshu stood there and gone, like, you need me. Like, it's a bit like, Batman and Joker in the 89 Batman. Like,
yep.
I made you. And he goes, well, you made me first, kind of thing, And it's like, tit for tat. This is that moment of Khonshu saying, well, I kind of made you. And he's going like, yeah, it's your fault. But do you know what? I don't need you. And I love this bit. You got, like, I am Marc Spector, I am Stephen Grant, I am Jake Lockley, and we are going to be okay. We're going to live with who we are. We are Moon Knight, and we never needed you. And that's the end. And it's
do they crush the skull of?
They crush the skull of Khonshu, and it rains, and you realise that all of this has been happening on his head, in his head, on the roof. So he's been somewhere, and he's just had like a psychotic break, and he's gone through therapy or something, and he's just addressed everything. And it's a phenomenally well written comic. I think the transitions of style, of art style, but also the rawness of having to no other comic character has ever done this, or very few. Like, Batman's never gone to therapy and really faced into his trauma of decades. Of, I lost my parents, I lost Jason Todd, I lost so-and-so.
The closest you get is kind of like, you get the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns. You often get with superheroes, you get the present day dealing with stuff, and then you get not dealing with trauma just after. You get it so far in the future, like things like Logan or a lot of the Old Man series is like, yeah, there was severe trauma here, but we're not going to really delve that. We're going to just show you the person completely and utterly broken at the end, and them just trying to vaguely survive, not deal with the trauma, just limp through it. And you're like,
well, the thing is,
you get in the middle.
Yeah, the thing is, like, you get the Old Man books, right? And I'll say we'll start to rock, because we're up to the new now. There's one area I want to cover quickly, and then we'll finish up on that. But the Old Man books, there are 3 Old Man books that I think are really good. There's become like an Old Man trilogy for me. There's The Dark Knight Returns, Old Man Logan, and Last Ronin. And Last Ronin, which is a recent Ninja Turtles book, which, if you haven't read, I highly recommend. And I'm not going to spoil it, because there's a bit of a twist in it. But there's like one Ninja Turtle left in the future. And, like, which one is it? Where have all the others gone? Where's Master Splinter? Where's Shredder? Like, all that sort of stuff. And it's very much the same. And as you say, it becomes like older grizzled, hard-bitten versions of the characters having to face up to the past, but they don't reconcile themselves. They don't, it's not therapy. They often end up either dying or getting close to death, or it's still a story of loss. Like, I don't care what you say. Like, Batman Return, Dark Knight Returns is still a story of loss in many cases. Like, as they all are. Lemire's Moonlight run is the opposite. It's a character stopping and actually facing into all that trauma and all their sort of thing and saying, I am who I am and I've got to deal with that. And it's an addict. This is an addict saying, like, I've literally reached the bottom of, I'm alone and I was the crazed version, the Huston version, and I've done all this and I became the lone version. And actually in doing that, I was able to reconcile. And so what happens with that is you do get the Bendis, the Bemis run, which is good fun. And there's got one called Crazy Runs in the Family, which is kind of fun. It's not, era defining, but there's some really good stuff in there. But one of the things it does do in the second part of his run, he introduces a character and you find out what that first trauma was.
Oh, okay.
And I don't want to spoil it because it's quite a good reveal. But you find out what that first trauma was and how it relates to why his dad was impacted by it as well. And it's actually, I like it. I think it's a bit controversial maybe, but I like it the way it's handled. But it runs through, and it's again this acceptance of, like, accept you're crazy is part of the sort of the story of it. But the most recent one, the Mackay run, is that rebuild. He's like, I've gone through this stuff. I can now go through, and I can be that thing. So he's got the Midnight Mission, and he's sort of building a family around himself again. And it has its ups and downs. And there is this, obviously there'll be no story if they just sort of like were like, yes, happy families.
Yeah, one issue done. It's a one shot. Moon Knight's okay. We'd never have to talk about him again.
No, but one of the great things that's happened in this other thing is it sort of, again, in that in his ability to reconcile with himself. He is able to sort of reconcile with parts of his own history. So, we're not going to get Marlene. We're not going to get Frenchie or Crowley. They've gone. Like, that era is gone, right? Post, really sort of like post Lemire, they become irrelevant.
That was kind of the full stop. It was like they've been up and down, and they're like, this is the end of that era. Yeah,
they do sort of appear in the Bemis run a little bit, but like, and there's a point in that where he actually has Mark now has a daughter, but
okay,
yeah, it hasn't really impacted anything. It's sort of a side piece, but it's gone. That's moved on. Like, that era is gone, and now we move on. But he's able to sort of like revisit his relationship with Tigress, which goes back to West Coast Avengers.
Wow.
Yeah, he ends up bringing in sort of like these young sort of like kids that are not kids, but they're sort of like young youth people, 20s, I know, that are in there. Sort of, they're lost. One of them two of them become vampires. So he's like, well, I don't want you to become a bad vampire, so I'm going to get Blade to train you so you can address it. Like, he's going to use his hero connections to help and stuff. The Midnight Mission itself is a supernatural sort of entity. Like, it's a haunted building. It's a sentient building that wants to help as well, but like in a dark kind of way. It's cool. And there's these other bits like that sort of to build. But more importantly, because of everything that's happened, and he's died so many times, there's another Moon Knight, or there's another avatar of Khonshu called Hunter's Moon. And so there's this sort of, now he's never had anyone that can really understand what this is to be the avatar of Moon Knight, which is one of the things that's never really been addressed. And all of a sudden he's got this person that's in the same position. It's very different to him, but they have this like older, younger, brotherly kind of respect. And all of a sudden, like, Mark's able to build up a family around him that he knows he can trust. But more than that, where he had that found family before, that were people, that were human, Gina and her boys, Crowley, Marlene, they weren't designed for this crap. Now he's got a couple of vampires. He's got another sort of like, avatar of Moon Knight, of Khonshu. He's got Tigress. They build up and he's like, oh, hang on, I've got a much more robust team and that around me, and he's still seeing a therapist and he's dealing with this stuff, and it's sort of like, it's an incredibly sort of it goes places, and there's stuff going on. It's a fantastic run. It's up there again as it sort of it bookends this stuff. And I'm not going to spoil anything for those who haven't read it yet. But you can see there's that running theme that goes all the way back, as you said. Like, you can't do, Grant Morrison did that thing with Batman in his run, where he sort of said, well, what if it's all real? Like, what if it all happened in a compressed period of time? Like, how messed up would you be? And sort of had fun with it, and you end up with sort of the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh and some crazy stuff, and it goes off the rails towards the end. Well, Mackay and others have sort of done the same, but they've not included everything, but they've gone, well, we need to include a lot of stuff from the 80s run. We know this happened in the Moon, it's Marc Spector Moon Knight, and then there was the Resurrection, and we can't ignore the Huston run and this and this. All that happened to this guy, but now he's sort of like, and he's still dealing with it, like it's a day-by-day kind of thing, but he is still a hero. And I really want to... I have to spoil something, because there was an issue recently that really sort of kind of sort of blew me away a little bit. And so massive spoilers for yourself, Mike. And,
I'm happy to take it.
Right. So issue 30 of the most recent Moon Knight run resulted in Moon Knight being killed.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the stakes were, he's been resurrected before. He always comes back, like Chucky says in Bride, he's sort of like, I always come back. But in this case, there was like, well, Khonshu is now in prison. The entity of Khonshu is actually in prison in Wakanda. So can't help. And there's another avatar of Khonshu. So if you die, you die. Like, there is no resurrection anymore. You don't need to be resurrected, because there's these factors. That's the point. We didn't take on the fact that he also beat the Avengers at one point, but yeah, that was sort of a Jason Aaron's Avengers run. That's a different thing. But basically, so he's died, and so they've now got a new run called Vengeance of the Moon Knight. Issue 1 was Mark's funeral, and it's his Shiva, because he's obviously Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, like, the heroes that we said before, Cap, Iron Man, all those that had rejected him and stepped away and stuff, or had been associated but in secret, they couldn't be public, all turn up. And whilst in Shiva you have to stay with the body for 7 days, don't you? That sort of thing. So they're recognizing his Jewish heritage as well, which is great. They all go out and do the work. They protect the neighborhood and they do that stuff for them. They're sort of representing the Midnight Mission. And then Ben Grimm turns up, who's obviously another recognized Jewish
and he's
superhero.
Quite a lot of connections with Moon Knight as well.
Yeah, because they've crossed paths and stuff in the past. Like, he turns up and does everything. Like, he's like, he's turned up with food. He's like telling them what they've got to do for the Shiva. And he says, well, there's no body, but like, we have to do, we want to do this to respect him in his sort of, his religion, his traditions. And it was just, and again, Jed Mackay just does it so well. But to me, it was that flag of going like, not just, it's like a meta point for me. It's like Moon Knight has been handled well and poorly over times. But this is a hero that I've followed and has gone through some crazy times and some wonderfully sort of like nutty things that I've really enjoyed. But again, like, I can literally look back, as we've just done, and go, this is someone's life. It feels like there's almost like because it's not thousands, as you say, sort of comics. It feels like someone's gone through some shit. And this feels like paying that off by going like, he died and these guys do respect him and he's earned that respect back. And that redemption that he was seeking during that the resurrection trauma years, where Cap and Iron Man were like, we don't want you on our side. And actually, you've got to run, you need to go on the run. And, you can be on the Avengers, but the secret Avengers, like, because we know you're nuts and, all this other stuff. Like, all that is gone. Like, people can publicly support him now. Like, he had the redemption that he was seeking. And it's so wonderfully well done. And yeah, I just think, that's the point with Moon Knight. I think the Moon Knight character has been through a lot. As Mark, Jake, and they're all back. So like, Mark and Jake and Stephen are there. And he's dealing with that and he still talks to them. And it's just, I don't know, just it feels like, it feels like a life lived, and whatever happens next, Jed Mackay's sort of said he hasn't finished. He's got a wider story to tell. It's going to sort of carry on. I'm excited for it. I'm loving it, and but doing the book as well just made me sort of reevaluate and rethink how this character, like, there's always Batman comparisons. They sort of say, "Oh, he's Marvel's Batman." He's not. Batman's
can confirm, as someone who come in.
Yeah.
You read literally the 80s run, the Huston run, the Lemire run, and the Ellis run. And if you read those and then you still think he's Batman, then I don't know what to tell you, because they clearly define you. For every comparison to Batman, because I wrote down a couple, I was like, well, there's a little one I could see. But for every one little comparison, you've got 5 reasons why it's completely different. Yeah.
Well, to me, one of the biggest things is, the running joke of Batman is that he's so super serious and so super prepared. And he's never, even I think Grant Morrison joked at one point that his superpower is his trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And he's never going to deal with it then. Like, he has to be that way. He has to be, all those things, all those people he's lost. Like, the biggest difference to me is, like, Batman is Batman, right? And he's ridiculously sort of super intelligent and all that other stuff that he does. But, like, the thing with Moon Knight is, like, he's just a broken guy. Not to say that DID is a symptom of that, but, like, even if he didn't have DID, he'd still have the trauma. He'd still be a broken guy that has spent a life looking, or at least a second half of his life, looking to rectify it and do some good.
And often doing some worse things.
And
like Huston run is literally him going too far of trying to be a superhero and literally going insane by it. And then it's the pendulum swinging of his own, not only sanity, but being okay with himself, like trying to find himself. And I think in a lot of these things, like Spider-Man, I think one of the links that you said earlier, one of the reasons that's so interesting about Moon Knight is he feels like a real person, because he's not Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, Wolverine. He's not someone that everyone and their mums and their nans have actually heard of. He's not in 1,000 plus issues of just one run that he's been in for nearly 100 years. He's in only, I think if you count up all the issues, including the Marc Spector one, probably 200. I'd get loosely 200.
About 200.
And so you think and you think like that. I know it's a weird thing, but in the canon of Star Wars comics, it's only been around for 10 years. Darth Vader has been in at least 150 that have got his own name in it. And I'm thinking, and obviously I know Vader's one of the biggest villains of all time, but you just think, there's so many of these characters where when I read, some of my favourite stories of Star Wars, I'm comparing because obviously Star Wars comics I read a lot of, my favourite ones, apart from the couple, there's the Vader ones we tackled on Desert Island comics a while ago, apart from occasional real big hitters, my favourite Star Wars comic stories are about random characters. My favourite Star Wars stuff is Rebels, because you don't have Luke Skywalker who you know is going to live. There's dramatic tension. There's weight. Moon Knight can and has died in issues, and although it's unlikely he's going to stay dead forever because it's comics, there is actual weight. You feel like Frenchie or Marlene could be, not maybe in the 80s run, but at point maybe, but they could die. Yeah. And you're thinking that would have weight, because if someone close enough to Spider-Man, a lot of Wolverine or anything like that, if any major member of those ensembles die, it has such a big ripple effect on every other aspect of the Marvel comic universe that you could almost not do it now, because if you kill this person, you have to have basically a giant event. Any time a major character dies, it has to be Civil War, it has to be Absolute Carnage, it has to, there has to be a big crossover event that at least 5 of the main titles are all intertwined with. But Moon Knight doesn't operate like that. He's got a few bits and pieces with Avengers and Cap and Tony Stark showing up and things. But because he's his own individual, and because it's up and down and stuff, people have a lot more freedom to do with it. And ironically enough, the way his character is defined is almost the same way that the character in universe is defined, which is unpredictable. It's got some really good, it's also got some quite bad. You don't know where it's going, but at its core, it's a great story. It's a great character. And at the core of what Marc Spector is actually trying to do since that night in Sudan, or the Egyptian border, since that night, he's just been trying to redeem himself from the mercenary and then consequently redeem himself from some of the things he did while trying to redeem himself. And that's his whole thing. And it's just a really interesting metaphor. And because of your essay book and because of, me, obviously I spoke to you prior on this and then the Disney Plus show, and then delving deep into some of the heavy hitters of the Moon Knight chronology, I love it. Like, I really am so bought in with Moon Knight. I was going to try to get some Moon Knight t-shirts, but there's like none of them are that actually that good. There's like one. But I'm like, there's so many I could think of that'd be so cool. But I really love Moon Knight as a character. I've really become invested, and I'm not just saying this. The 2022 run, I'm really going to delve into. I want to finish the Huston run first, just so I've got that full story, and then I'm going to delve into the 2022 run because I'm really interested by that. But your essay book, and I know we've delved super deep into Moon Knight for like 2.5 hours, so couldn't talk about all the essays as much as we potentially wanted to. But every person who wrote one of those essays, I liked all of the essays. I think they're all fantastic. I think your introduction is great. I kept referring to it in my notes because that nice little table you've got, which shows the runs and things, and each individual involved really gave me another perspective on Moon Knight. And me reading these comics and pushing myself to do it because of this essay, I genuinely I had so much fun with it, and I think I've learned quite a lot. And I feel like with so many other big characters in comics, you don't get that. No. So I did want to thank you for writing that. But before we go, because I know it is very late, I want just the final sort of question, then I'll ask, then we can wrap up, is with what do you want from the future of Moon Knight? And as a parallel, what do you want from the future of Moon Knight in comics? Because obviously at the moment he's died and he'll probably come back, but who knows? Eventually probably will. But also with Disney Plus and the series, we didn't really talk about that much, but we both enjoyed it. I adored it.
Loved it.
And like, I think season 2 has been confirmed now. I believe they've confirmed that they're starting to film it and stuff. So I'm interested to see where that goes. But on screen and in comics, what do you want from Moon Knight going forward, if anything? And then we'll wrap up.
Yeah. With comics, I think, I don't know. I think the thing is, because it's been such a roller coaster, and I think at least for the last decade, I'm happy with all of it, and I adore a good part of it. So I'm kind of, at the moment, like, I'm really enjoying what Jed Mackay is doing, and the artist whose name escapes me at the moment, but his art is phenomenal as well. So they're acting as a partnership in the colouring, and again, it's such a good run that I'm kind of like, I'm just enjoying the ride. Like, take me on this ride. What do I want? I don't know. Like, you can't have. There's always, all superheroes are always going to be in their second act. Like, there's never going to settle down. Like, there'll always be something new. There'll probably be a new phase. Like, this might be the end of this phase, and he's going to go off and do something else. I don't know. I'm just open to it. I think that's the way I've always been. It's like, let's see what happens. We'll see how it goes. On screen, I love the interpretation of Moon Knight they had. It's very different. The superpowers are there, which is fine. But Oscar
that was my
Isaac's
only critique. That I was like, I like it all, but from reading the comics, the subtleties I don't like as much. But I do love Khonshu and the antagonistic kind of, especially at the end where he's like, "I'll get Layla," and Mark's like, "Okay, I have to basically do what you want," because here's the whole classic of Mark doing the right thing in the wrong way.
Yeah. F. Murray Abrams' voice of Khonshu is fantastic, but the one thing I loved about that show more so than seeing Moon Knight do his stuff and seeing Mr. Knight and all that other stuff was great, but the moment when you realise why he ends up becoming Stephen, and it's the confrontation of his mum's funeral. I almost cried when I was rewatching it like the other week. I was like, I'd completely forgotten. There was that is the moment in this when I was like, you get this. They get Moon Knight. They get Mark. This is the thing, the trauma and the unwillingness as a point to confront it. And that's where Stephen comes from. And where we're going to find out where Jake comes from at the end. Like, that's the rage. Like, that's the rage of it all. And we haven't addressed that yet. So we will. I would like to see him come back. I want to see him like cross paths with other heroes. There's others on sort of, Disney Plus, Echo. I haven't seen the show yet, but I've heard it's quite good. Daredevil now coming back in would be kind of interesting. But if you're going to put it on the big screen, at the moment, they were sort of heading down that. I don't know what's happening now because they were having all the whole deity thing. They had the Eternals, which is going to lead to the Ebon Blade and all that kind of shit. I don't know, because if I'm honest, I feel a little bit like the MCU has gone off the rails. Like, I haven't watched the Marvels yet. I have.
I thought it was fantastic, to be honest.
Yeah,
with you.
it's on Disney Plus today, so I will catch it. I will definitely catch it. I just don't go to the cinema for things anymore. I just don't.
Which is fair.
Yeah. So I will catch it. But yeah, I don't know. It feels a bit like I'd love to see him on the big screen, and I want to see him doing his thing. And if anything, I'd kind of like to see him not against Thor, but like, an Asgardian facing up and going, oh, there's the Egyptian pantheon of gods as well. Like, that's something that's got to be addressed. And so, yeah, I don't know. If you were to, you've now had the Greek gods in Love and Thunder, which was dreadful, but
yep.
and you've had the Norse gods as well, and now we know the Egyptian gods. I kind of want that, like take it a bit more serious. Not Thor 2 serious, but like bring in Thor, bring in Hercules, bring in Moon Knight, and have that sort of those kind of things. I think would be quite interesting. Yeah, I don't know. There's other opportunities, all kinds of things we could do.
Yeah, I agree, and I loved the comic. I loved the series. I want a whole nother series of Moon Knight where he probably doesn't interact with anyone apart from maybe one as a little thing. And then I want this, and unfortunately we're in the age where this never bloody happens anymore, annoyingly, is I want him to show up without everyone knowing about it 5 fucking years beforehand.
Yeah.
I want him to show up in a film that we wouldn't expect to see him in that's not Deadpool 3. I think it could be all right, but I think he'll go down the comedy route too much, and I don't want him... I've had a taste of comedy stuff in some of the comics, and I much prefer the... Go ahead, sorry.
I know I agree. I don't want him in the Moon Knight in the Deadpool show, but there's going to be a reference to him there's already, I've seen, so if you've seen the photos of the set photos of Deadpool 3.
I saw one of Hugh Jackman and Deadpool in the outfits, and I've not seen anything else.
Right, okay. There's been other bits and pieces leaked. Mostly that, right? But one of them in the background is the cupcake van from episode 1 of Moon Knight. And it's just sort of, it's sat there and it's at an angle and in this rubble, and you're like, oh, they're like, so there's going to be a joke about props from Disney Plus or something. There's going to be a joke about that. So I think there's going to be a reference. It's going to be as a reference, but I don't think he's going to be in it. But yeah, we'll see. I just think, I'd love this. I want season 2 because, the ending of season 1 is great. Jake has now been sort of like released and is acting on Khonshu's behalf. So how does that sort of like, reconcile? So yeah, that's what I want.
What's his suit going to look like? Is it going to look like the Black Spectre or something? Because they've each got their own suits.
Well, I don't know. I think, you got the bone suit, or you've got, it's got to be interesting. He would have been better as Mr. Knight, I think. Stephen as Mr. Knight was fine, but like Mr. Knight is supposed to be the serious loner rather than the silly one. But still, he's very awesome.
There's my Funko Pop of Benson.
Nice.
I've got a nice little, my only Moon Knight merch because it's impossible to get any.
Yeah, it's very rare of it.
I loved the aesthetics of the Disney Plus show, and I thought Mr. Knight visually was phenomenal. I was like, I love the look of him, and I love Stephen Grant unashamedly. I think although his character's very different in what he owns and what he has, at his core, he's basically just the best of what Marc Spector could be. Just with a different, without loads of money behind him. So yeah, I love that. I really want good things for Moon Knight. I want his Disney Plus show to continue. I'd be happy with just only really seeing Moon Knight in the series, basically completely separate to a lot of the events, almost like the comic runs, but one or two little connections. Like when the Avengers Kang stuff is all going on, I wouldn't mind him being in a scene or so, and then kind of just either being like, I've got bigger things going on actually right now, and
I've got my own issues.
Like there's like, do you have any idea about the Egyptian gods? Do you know how powerful they are? Like we're dealing with Kang. It's like that doesn't. I need to go deal with this, and then that's it. And like then series 3 is like the big finale or something. Like I want him to be acknowledged and a little cameo. Or even if it's a post-credit sequence of like them going to find Moon Knight and he's just busy doing something. Little hints of him in the movie, but I don't want it to be like a team up. I don't want him to play a major role. I want his own, because I love the series being its own thing. I loved Loki being its own thing. The series, I think, that do their own things, I think are working better for me.
I agree. Yeah.
And so that's what I'd like. But thank you so much for coming on, Scott.
No, thank you for having me talking.
We could have easily gone on for another 2 hours. Easy.
Yeah.
But please tell us. So the book itself, obviously, it's here, Waxing and Waning.
Waxing and Waning
I'll
from
do links,
Sequart.
Tell us all the plugs, all that stuff, what you're up to. The floor is yours, good sir. And we'll wrap it up.
Well, the book is available on all the Amazons and everything else. So it's available as a physical paperback and an ebook. So, you can get us both. Please go visit sequart.org for all the other books that they have available. Obviously, Judging Dread, which is the first book we did, which is also available on the Amazons. Just Google Scott Weatherly. I'm there. But obviously, doing Stories Out of Time and Space and 20th Century Geek podcasts. We have a Patreon, and more than that, Julian, who I do podcasts, Stories Out of Time and Space with, I've got a whole bunch of stuff coming up. We're actually getting a Kickstarter together for an Akira Kurosawa retrospective that we've been doing and we're editing at the moment. And we've got another book coming up. We're doing essays on sci-fi films, volume 1, which is going to be from the first 2 seasons of Stories Out of Time and Space. I've literally just been writing about Demolition Man and Quatermass and a bunch of others, so I'm really excited about that. And then, don't know, more stuff coming down the line, probably. If I was to do another comic book, one of these, possibly Spawn, I think.
Oh, to be fair, I wouldn't mind if it was either later in the year or this time next year. I wouldn't mind having a bit of homework to do, and like 3 or 4 kind of main key. I can get a couple months to warning, because I know nothing about Spawn. I had one of the Spawn villain action figures. I played a Spawn video game, and I've caught some amount of the Spawn movie, and I've read like 4 pages in my memory loosely of a Spawn comic. But aside from how he looks, I could identify him, and that's almost all I could say. So I'd be happy to do an abridged deep dive into Spawn.
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, fun. I've got a bit of it. I'm doing a full run read at the moment. So I had to write an essay for Tony. I did a comparison of Spawn and classical hell-based literature. So Dante's Inferno and some of those other things. So I wrote that for him. I was like, I'm going to carry on reading. So I'm up to like issue 150 at the moment. So.
Amazing stuff. And hopefully we've got plans as well in this year to collaborate again, and I'm sure we will be on that train in the future. But Scott, thank you so much for chatting with me about Moon Knight. Thank you for really introducing me to Moon Knight as a character and really getting me into the world. I'm very excited to start the true Midnight Mission. Just thank you for putting out the essay book. It's fantastic. If anyone is a fan of Moon Knight, I really recommend it. I recommend obviously reading some Moon Knight before you do that, but it's a really, really great companion. I think if you do what I did and read those kind of main runs, I'll list in the description as well, and that Scott's mentioned, and then give this, because it's got some really interesting perspectives that will make you want to reread the runs again and get all kinds of stuff. Brilliant stuff. And obviously all the people in it have written essays are fantastic, including friend of the show, Tony Farina. So thanks again so much, Scott. And thank you to everyone for listening, and we'll speak to you very soon. And that's the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, my friend, make sure you check out Scott's other podcasts, the 20th Century Geek, as well as Stories Out of Time and Space. Make sure you check out the Moon Knight essay book, because it's really, really cool, as well as lots of other stuff that Scott has been up to, including his other appearances on Genuine Chit-Chat, or even times where I've been on the 20th Century Geek, including the Batman Retrospective, the Desert Island Comics Star Wars edition, and the upcoming June episode. But what have we got coming up? Well, next week I think I'll be releasing my Clone Wars Conversations, which should have been out in February, but because it's been Comics in Motion 1000, I delayed it ever so slightly. So that will be Season 2, Part 1 of the Clone Wars, the first 11 episodes of Season 2. That is myself, Math, and Dave talking about it. We had a great time there. And then Part 2 will be out in a few weeks after that, because we're due to be recording that very soon. But Comics in Motion 1000. So if you've paid attention to my Star Wars Comics in Canon podcast, or many of the collaborations that I've done on the feed of Comics in Motion, then you'll know about how long it's been going. It's 6 years old, and on the day of the 6-year anniversary, we released the 1000th episode special. That's what I hosted, and basically asked listener-submitted questions to Chris, Dave, Tony, and Max. All of us have been with Comics in Motion from early on. Chris and Dave obviously started the podcast, so we talk about that. If you've never listened to Comics in Motion or anything like that, it's a perfect introductory episode. It kind of introduces the new era, and it also serves as a celebration for everything that's come up to this point. So I'll put a link in the description for that as well. But it was absolutely great fun, and the video version of that is found on Genuine Chit-Chat's YouTube channel, so go check that out as well. It was a really, really great conversation, and please share it with your friends and tell everyone about it, because it's just a really, really great podcast and a great family to be a part of. There's some other stuff coming up. I've done a couple of guest spots, so I guessed on the VHS Strikes Back, but I'll give you more information on that when that actually releases. Obviously, I mentioned I'm on the 20th Century Geek. There's a couple of Spider-Dan podcasts that are coming up. There's going to be a Back to the Filmography podcast coming up in a few months' time as well. So lots of collaborations with some amazing creators as well. I'm also planning to have Chris on the podcast to talk about Las Vegas and things, which is going to be really, really cool, considering in August this year, myself and Megan are getting married then. And it's just going to be lots more conversations with some more familiar people, but I've got a few special guests that are coming up, people who haven't been on the podcast before, so I'm very, very excited to have them on too. Now, if you want to support the show, follow me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat on Instagram, X, Facebook, and Threads. Also, it's on TikTok where I post the occasional thing as well. You can share the show with your friends. You can leave reviews on all the various places. You can leave ratings on Spotify, reviews on Audible, Apple Podcasts, all that great stuff. And it really, really helps the show out, so please do that if you could. In addition, you can support the show financially by going to patreon.com/genuinechitchat, and for as little as £1 a month, you get immediate access to over 200 episodes of Afterthoughts. That's where either I do a few Star Wars Legends book reviews, but primarily myself and Megan release an episode every week about mainly movie reviews or TV show reviews, but we also review some other stuff as well, including live performances we've seen. We go on road trips and holidays and things and talk about those as well. And we've got some cool stuff coming up in the future as well. So if you want to support the show and also get bonus content and get early access to stuff, please consider going to patreon.com/genuinechitchat. But that's going to be enough from me, my friends. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I will talk to you next week, likely with Clone Wars Conversations Season 2 Part 1, and there's loads more cool stuff to come. But thank you for supporting as always, share with all your friends, and I'll talk to you next week.